what we're coming into here to talk about Sikh activism, Sikh organizing. As you can see, we've changed things up a little bit from the from the program to where we're just going to do one combined panel. And I will. Yes, we will have a couple intermissions. Don't worry. We're gonna do one combined panel today because, to be honest, this has been such a fantastic discussion. There's been a lot of discussion around identity. Okay, which mic should we use? Oh, we have to use this for the recording, correct? Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll just take this one. Okay. So, yeah, thanks everyone for joining us in the round here. And thank you for joining us for this panel. Frankly, it's more of a discussion than a panel. There's no papers or anything like that. And this is supposed to be interactive. This panel, this discussion on organizing and the evolution of Sikh organizing from both the organizational and the young activist, the young organizer perspective. You know, just by way of introduction, Navdeep Singh with SALDEF and the Sikh American History Project. He, him, his are my pronouns, and since this is an organizing thing, I will spare you though of all the standard things we like to do. The ground rules, you know, don't yuck my yum, step up, step back, and then asking you all to introduce yourselves with your pronouns and what flavor of ice cream you wish you were. So as I mentioned, and as you saw in the discussion, we've had a fantastic, to be frank, it's just so perfect the way that this morning's discussion set us up to close today's conversation with this panel, with this discussion about organizing. You know, throughout the conference, we've been engaging in this discourse that has been interrogating identity, the multiplicities of identity, how we relate to the hegemonic power structures that we integrate with and interact with. And then, as we just heard, how, and as we heard even yesterday with Sasha's work, how caste, class, immigration waves change the perspectives in which we interact with that power structure. And so our hope today is to really deep dive into the reality of what that's like and where the decisions are being made by Sikh organizations and by the next generation that's going to be leading this new activism. You know, as I think what's also really important to think about here is, as Sharanjeet, Michael, and Daypal set us up this morning, there is a vast spectrum of what is defined as activism, from in the academy to criticizing on the outside, as you remember the interplay between Michael and Sharon. We're also, as Michael and Daypal put out, talking to multiple audiences, and that's the context in which these organizations are navigating themselves. They're talking to the mainstream while messaging to community, and messaging to community of a variety of backgrounds, even though they may all have at least one common organizing identity. You know, so this means that the theory, the undocumented and unpublished negotiation, that oral history that they were referring to this morning, all of that results in a praxis that is serving the goal of identity formation and the development of, frankly, third spaces to navigate power structures both within and outside of community. And it's important to note that for many of these organizations, as Sharanjeet said this morning, they're not designed to accommodate us. They're designed to actively exclude us. And then, of course, as Puninder and Dr. Kurian discussed in the political space, and we had the discussion about fascism and the discussion about sovereignty and legitimacy. all of this then comes back to that question of navigating the social engagement of our values through both through sovereignty and meeting basic survival needs for our communities. And we bring all of that up because, particularly as Jasbir shared this morning, a lot of the research and analysis about organizations and about the Sikh American movements has been focused early migrants. I want to make sure we move away from taking the insight earlier, move away from the sojourner theory, but to actual settlers. Then speeding ahead to 1965 happened, and as we heard in the discussion of the textbooks, maybe you have a mention of 9/11. Oak Creek might be mentioned. In fact, as we saw in the video today, I will say as just a clarification on the video that Roundtable shared, that the reason CNN used that video was because they had no other B-roll of a Sikh Gurdwara in their archives, and no other major media outlet had anything if you compare all of their coverage of the massacres at Oak Creek. So what we're trying to figure out here is where have we come from those spaces? How was this activism actually predate 9/11? Because as a community we've been here longer, or people have been organizing longer. And then how have events like Oak Creek and frankly other events that have occurred in the digital and connected age changed the way that that organizing is happening today, and the way that people are approaching organizing and changing power structures. I'm super excited to be joined by this frankly amazing panel of co-collaborators, conspirators, and all-around rabble-rousers. I will apologize now for all of the noise we made last night at the gala. We actually met and we were like, we kind of feel bad about that, and like a lot of the inside looks we've been sharing throughout the conference. But please, this is not just supposed to be a discussion where they're talking to you. We are all organizers. We know that what we have to do is talk with you. And so please interrogate us. We're going to ask questions back. We're going to respond. That's what we want to have here. So I will start at the end of the panel over there and work my way down this way. So first we have Jagpreet Singh from Desis Rising Up and Moving, DRUM, which is an activist, an organization in New York City. And I will let all of them tell you more about their backgrounds and organizations throughout the conversation. Of course, there's a more detailed description in the program booklet. Then we have Tarina Ahuja, who is a student at Harvard and is the founder of Young Khalsa Girls, a grassroots organization, and an alum of the Sikh Lead program, which Jasbir also graduated from, which is sponsored by SALDEF. We have next Komal Chohan, who is a Sikh American activist based out of the Midwest, and she was thrust into the limelight as a community leader in the aftermath of the FedEx shooting in Indianapolis, Indiana. We have Kiran Gill, who is the executive director, and I've been told that term, not everyone knows what an ED is. An ED is the head honcho, think of them as the university president who actually still has to do the work, not just the development stuff, for SALDEF, which is the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, a national Sikh American advocacy and impact organization founded in 1996. Then we have Amaris Kaleka, who is a Sikh American junior at Shorewood High School, and she is from Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Finally, we have someone who probably all of your kids and grandkids know as Ameeb, at Jaslin from Queens. Jaslin Kaur is a Sikh American Punjabi organizer born and raised in Queens, New York. She now serves as the co-chair of the New York City Democratic Socialists in America, one of the largest, it's the largest, right? The largest socialist organization in the United States. So thank you all so much. And now I'm going to take a seat and really lean it over, toss it over to everyone here. I guess we will still have to try to go into the mic so that way they can record us properly. But I will start off first with, I think it's really important to set the context of where these, or at least the organizations here come from. And I'm going to focus first on SALDEF and DRUM as long-standing organizers in community. So Kiran, would you mind sharing with us a little bit about SALDEF's mission and its sort of the evolution of its work over the years?
Sure, thanks Navdeep. Is this on?
I think you're going to have to speak, this is for the recording, you'll have to speak up to.
Okay.
Oh,
it is on. All right.
Oh, it's on?
Yeah. All right. First of all, thank you so much for having us here. I think this is an important conversation, and it's so nice to see academia and the organizing community get together, share these spaces, and think collectively about ways forward and areas that we need to work on, the infrastructure that we need to build. So just wanted to put that out there. I think it's kind of, I guess, appropriate I start. I think I'm the oldest person on the panel, so I probably have the most, I guess, history in terms of organizing and being in these spaces and seeing some of these things through lived experiences. The history of SALDEF is interesting. So it actually predates 9/11. A lot of times we talk about organizing, and I think maybe just because of ease or because of, it was such a significant event in terms of Sikh American history, we think of 9/11 as being this pivotal point for organizing, and it was in many ways. But SALDEF started, in the mid-90s. It started under the name SMART, so Sikh Media and Resource Task Force. And the reason that it was started in the 90s and 96 was to combat misrepresentation of Sikh Americans in the media. And what the two founders, Manjeet Singh and Jasbir Singh, had found was there were a lot of articles that were misrepresenting Sikhs. There was a lot that was going on in the 90s. And in particular, there was an article in the New York Times by Thomas Friedman, which labeled Sikhs as terrorists. So there was a real pushback. There was a need for there to be a voice for the community. And that is the reason that SALDEF was founded. Again, at that time, the name was SMART. Fast forward a couple years, post around the time of 9/11. So at that time, we were the only national Sikh American advocacy group that existed. 9/11 happened, and I know all of you know the history. Many of you have lived that history. I was actually a student studying at NYU at the time, so I watched that history unfold in person. But as we know, that deeply affected the community. Despite trying to combat misrepresentation for several years, there was still broad lack of awareness of who Sikhs are. We saw the image of Osama bin Laden, a man with a turban and beard, and the vast majority of Americans, reacted to that in a very negative way, misidentified Sikhs, and we saw the results in terms of hate crimes and hate incidents across the country. And SALDEF was getting calls. I was not with SALDEF at the time, but my understanding is we were getting hundreds of calls from Sumit, who I think was there in the office at the time, not necessarily prepared to respond to this sort of volume and need from the community. But it was at that point in time that the mission changed, and it included, legal intakes, victim support services, really that response services that were needed at the time. And at that time also, as many of you know, Sikh Coalition was founded in the wake of 9/11. I know somebody mentioned United Sikhs yesterday. They were actually founded pre-9/11. So there were, there were organizations that were pre-9/11, and I think DRUM as well. So that was really kind of the focus at the time in the 9/11 era. And I think the thesis, at that moment, and if I look back in the archives of SALDEF, again, it wasn't ED at the time, but I think the thesis that sort of, informed the organizing was that, Americans just didn't know who Sikhs are, right? There was a lack of awareness, and therefore you saw things like training and education programs. And, I think that's, as we've seen through our work and our studies, that's true, continues in many ways to be true. So there was a focus on trainings with TSA, law enforcement, FBI, a lot of the sort of structures that are involved in security. And so that was something that, again, was a focus at the time. As we move forward, out of such an intense response mode, we continued with the response and the support. I think there was some thought about how do we do the preventative work, and so that's when you see some of the education in schools. You see the work around how can we get involved with advocacy and policy, how can we increase our civic engagement efforts, and so you see that sort of trend in terms of the focus of organizations like SALDEF. And I'm skipping over a lot because it's a 25-year history, but I can sort of speak to where we are now. I think that what's interesting in the work that we do and things that I'm thinking about, we still certainly do see a lack of awareness of who Sikhs are, and that needs to be combated in a number of different areas. But something that we also think a lot about at SALDEF is, building leadership and capacity in the Sikh American community. As a national organization of 10 people, we are called to respond in all areas of the country. You have, again, I think there was a number of organizations mentioned. No one organization can do it alone. And I think that's where we're thinking about collaborations. We're thinking about how can we get resources and how can we build the infrastructure in our community. The second thing I think we're thinking about, I would say especially in the last couple of years, is the power structures that we operate in under and how we align. And I think there has definitely been a shift to in the understanding of how we have related and how we should relate to those power structures. So, we've been thinking about, our law enforcement programs, for example. Right now, I'm the chair of the Faith-Based Security Advisory Council for DHS, which, as many of you may be familiar, that's quite a problematic agency for a community and for other communities of color. So I think...
Sorry, no. Folks may not know what DHS is.
Oh, sorry, Department of Homeland Security. Sorry for the acronyms. Sorry about that. So I think, those are conversations that I think we're having. I think, a lot of the younger organizers will talk about their experiences, especially growing up in the wake of 9/11, in the wake of Oak Creek. And as we work with, youth through our Sick Lead programs, I think a lot of these ideas and understanding of their relationship to these systems, what it means to be a Sikh American, is certainly different, and I guess it continues to evolve, but it's certainly shifting from what I remember. I grew up in the 80s, so again, I'm certainly the oldest person on this panel. But no, I think that's interesting, and I think it continues to challenge us, and I think we should continue to be challenged, especially as we are a voice, for the community in DC, and a lot of times the only Sikh voice in a room of individuals that hold power nationally on that level. So I'll turn it over to, I guess, back to Navdeep.
And then I guess we'll turn now to Jagpreet to talk about drum and organizing that has been happening within New York.
So in 1999, a young Equatorial Guinean man by the name of Amadou Diallo was walking home in the Bronx. He was a student, international student in the Bronx. He also sold bootleg VHSs on the side, which is, if you remember the 90s, that was a big thing. He's coming home, minding his own business. He hears noise behind him. Two people jump out of a car, aim their guns at him, tell him to turn around, and he does what any one of us would have done at that point, and books it. And he shot 41 times. Those people ended up being the NYPD. That was an awakening moment for many immigrants within New York City. Rodney King happened not too long ago. There are other shootings within New York. And a group of South Asian, Indo-Caribbean activists within the Jackson Heights area, a place many of you may know as an anchor community for many across the South Asian community, came together and decided enough is enough. We need to step up. We need to do something about this. So for the first time in the history of Jackson Heights, they organized a rally within their own community. Not going to Midtown, not going to Manhattan, not going to the white areas of town, but within the South Asian community to show that we also need to stand in solidarity with our immigrant community, with the Black community, with the Latinx community. And that's where the formation of DRUM started. DRUM stands for Desis, Rising Up and Moving. These initial activists also took the name from a formation out of Detroit called the Dodge Revolutionary Union Movement, which was started by Black union members who were excluded from the AFL-CIO and decided to create their own union within the Dodge factories. Taking leadership from them, they created an organization that is membership-based, membership-led, and membership-driven. Not too long after 9/11 happened in our city. The first hate crime to happen after 9/11 happened in the streets of Manhattan against a Sikh individual where he was chased by a mob in the streets of Manhattan. The second hate crime happened in Richmond Hill, our spiritual community in New York City, right outside of our Gurdwara, which was built in 1968, where 3 young white men beat a bujurg, elderly individual from our community, with baseball bats the night of 9/11. This is the backdrop of the founding of our organization. After 9/11, the federal government launched the NSEERS program, the National Registry, where in major cities, Muslim men had to go down to government offices and register themselves. 90,000 in New York City had to register themselves. If they were undocumented, if their visas were about to expire, if their green cards were about to expire, they were deported. They were not allowed to go back home. They registered, oh, your green card's about to expire? There's the line, get out. We had families coming to our offices, to our organizers, being like, my dad, my uncle, my grandfather had to go down. I haven't seen him in days. I don't know what's going on. Only to find out their family members were deported. So this is one of the first campaigns that we were fighting against. And from the beginning, Sikhs were with us. When the police brutality incidents were happening, the kids of Sikh immigrants who were beaten by the Punjab police, who were brutalized back in Punjab, understood what police brutality here looked like and what it meant, because their parents went through it, their uncles, their generation before them went through it. When they saw the registration of Muslims being done like this, they understood 1984 wasn't too long ago and how it impacted our communities. Since then, we've done a lot. We've grown as an organization. Our membership is about 4,500 strong in New York City, and includes people across the South Asian Indo-Caribbean diaspora, from Punjab to Pakistan to Nepal to Bangladesh to Bhutan to the diaspora, including Guyana, Indo-Caribbeans in Guyana, Indo-Caribbeans in Trinidad, to Indo-Fijians and Indo-East Africans. We have organizers who speak a multiple of languages, including all the languages that I've just stated, and we've grown as an organization from just operating in Jackson Heights to every single South Asian Indo-Caribbean community across New York City. And a lot of our work is making sure that those folks who are the most impacted are the ones that we're taking leadership from. A majority of our membership is undocumented, without papers, border crossers, people who've overstayed their visa, and so on. All of our membership, we only take membership from working class New Yorkers, working class South Asian Indo-Caribbean folks. So all of our membership is working class. And that dictates the work that we do. One of our major campaigns in the beginning, when we first stepped into the political work, was to fight for driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. A 10-year fight that took a lot of pushback, a lot of rhetoric was spread against our community, but we fought for 10 years. We got that passed. A lot of our initial fights were around making sure that the DREAM Act was passed, making sure that DACA was continued to be renewed, making sure that the rhetoric that was spreading against immigrants, against our communities after 9/11 across the country was pushed back upon. And we start to see other things that was impacting our communities. Police brutality was starting to impact within our neighborhoods, within Richmond Hill. Punjabi kids were being picked up, searched and frisked by the cops left and right. And we needed to push back against that. We knew at that time that this was impacting the mental health of our community. They were afraid to leave, knowing that they would be searched. The NYPD was starting to recruit young Muslim men to be informants. They would catch you smoking a joint around the corner from your house, pick you up and say, we will put you in jail for weeks unless you become an informant for us. Famous case of one of our members committed suicide because of this. These are the types of situations we've for long had to respond to. And it's, as I mentioned, we are a multi-language organization. We work with many communities, and it's building that sense of solidarity. The issues that our Punjabi community faces in New York City, the working class Punjabis, isn't too different from what the working class Bangladeshis in our community, the working class Nepalis, the working class Pakistanis are facing. So a lot of our work is bringing folks together to the same room and having discussions. We hold meetings every month in all of our bases. Richmond Hill, as I mentioned before, a large base for our Punjabi community. They live right next door to and are in the same community as our Indo-Caribbean Guyanese community. So when we hold meetings there, we're holding them with Punjabi interpretation, making sure that conversations are happening between members, making sure that we're coming together. As the work has evolved over the years, as we've seen the importance of taking on legislative work, we've expanded into making sure that our community members are trained in what is the electoral politics of New York City, how do we get legislative wins. Just as the pandemic started, one of the things we saw was a lot of our members, especially in the Punjabi community, a lot of our undocumented Punjabi folks are day laborers, construction workers, often working for other Punjabis who own construction companies, sometimes getting underpaid, but that's a story for later on. We can talk about that later. But something that happened during the pandemic is most of them lost their jobs because construction had halted. And guess what? If you're undocumented, you don't get unemployment. So we saw this was impacting our communities. People weren't able to pay their rents. They weren't able to put food in their stomach and bring home any money. So we spoke with our community, we spoke with our partners, and we launched a first of its kind unemployment fund within the state of New York that we fought for through the legislature to get $1 billion for undocumented immigrants to have access to an unemployment fund for the first time in the history of America. I believe California took our example later on and also passed it, but yeah, we were first. And we continue to do that fight. So that was a one-time thing that happened, but we didn't stop there. Now we're asking for a continuous replenished fund that exists because we know emergencies happen. We know that things happen. And this is kind of the thought that we have, is not that what is possible. That's not what we fight for. We fight for what can we imagine? What is the next step? What has been deemed not possible that we can continue fighting for? And I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Jagpreet and Kiran. I'm actually going to turn now to allow our younger organizers. Like Kiran, I mean, come on, you all saw the video. Hi. Our younger organizers who are not leading established organizations. How's that? How's that?
Compromise.
Okay. You saw the pictures. I got gray now. I can do it. I'm going to allow the rest of the panel to introduce themselves. And then for the flow of the conversation, one of the reasons we decided to merge this together was because there was a lot of conversation and overlap in what they were saying. Because we see that there's an intersection between the organizational reality and the individual on the ground reality. And how the two of them have to work in a discursive context with each other, constantly, cyclically informing each other. And so what we're going to do is we're then going to move into a series of almost a conversation between them where they're reacting to each other. And then we'll move to reacting to some of what they've heard throughout this conference. And again, throughout this process, if you have something that you want to ask or follow up on, please just raise your hand and we'll move the mic around. Because this is you are supposed to be part of this conversation as it is happening, so that way we are all co-creating. So I guess, Tarina?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tarina. Will you start?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Tarina, as Navdeep said, and I was born in 2002. And so a theme that we've talked about often is being in the wake of 9/11. And so I was born right then. And I think that, you know, my background kind of all stems from the experiences that I've seen and the experiences that folks around me have seen. To give you a little bit of background about what I do and where I come from, I was born in Chicago, and then when I was young, my family moved to Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. And so a place where I was the only person that looked like me in almost every room I walked into. And so my earliest experience that I actually have a vivid memory of was me being 6 years old and walking into my classroom. It was recess, we were on the swings, we were having a great time, and then a little girl named Nancy comes up to me and gives me a picture of my face stuck onto Osama bin Laden's and tells me that this is a picture of your father. And so from a very young age, I realized that there was something about me that was otherized, something about me that was foreign, something that, you know, caught in this being extremely visible, but then also invisible at the same time, and kind of like living in that contradicting reality. When I was a little bit later in life, middle school, I got to kind of be introduced to a larger Sikh Sangat when we moved to Northern Virginia, and out of that came the birth of Young Khalsa Girls. And so what Young Khalsa Girls is an organization that's dedicated to giving tools to young Sikh women to understand what it means to lead and advocate in our communities. And so we do work on things from gun control to mental health to community health to building generational conversations and trying to close some of those divides. Things like environmental equity and looking at all of the communities we exist in and understanding what it means to be a Sikh woman with the experiences that we've been socialized into, but what it means to also activate on those experiences. And so what kind of it all comes back to, whether it's with Young Khalsa Girls or thinking about organizing work I do with other racial communities in hopes of building solidarities, whether it's with SALDEF or Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the ACLU of Virginia, all folks that I've worked with, it's kind of with this prevailing idea of what does it mean at the very core to build communities based in care and communities based in empathy? What does it mean to look at another human being and say, maybe I don't don't know exactly what your lived experience is, but I want to sit across from you and learn about it and understand how we work together and organize on top of it. And so what does it mean to build these threads of solidarity like you were talking about, and also just this idea of what does it mean to build radical love. I know there was a joke last night that in academia you can't talk about love, but I think that in organizing and in activating, love is kind of at the core of so much of it. And so how can we build that love between each other through these constant conversations, dialogues, and activation against the systems and powers that be? So that's a little bit about me and where I'm coming from.
Komal, we're just gonna go down the line.
Either way. We made it happen. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. It's always hard to talk after Tarina. But my name's Komal. I'm from Indianapolis, and as Navdeep said, I was really pushed to the forefront after the FedEx mass shooting. And the reason is there's not a lot of young Sikh organizers in the Midwest, whether that's because of lack of education or just people refusing to take up space in a very racist state. And it's very hard to navigate certain things, and I'm coming to learn that as of the last 2 years. But to set the scene of what we walked into, the FedEx mass shooting is like a warehouse. So when you think of the people that work in warehouses, we're thinking of the invisible people. We're talking about elders. We're talking about non-English speaking people that cannot advocate for themselves. They don't understand what to do after suffering such intense trauma. These are grandmoms and, parents that have just lived such a quiet life in Indiana and then suddenly have to deal with a mass shooting. Nobody knows how to navigate any of that. And so U-Meed kind of came to light when we just saw this pattern of trauma-induced addiction continue. So people kind of brushed off seeing their peers murdered in front of them because that's what they've done that before. When we're talking about 84, we're talking about 47 with the grandparents. They've just kind of never addressed a lot of things, whether that's like the mindset of let's continue to be in the background, we don't want to create issues, and like I said, when we're in a state where it's kind of hard to address a lot of things, nobody was. So then a bunch of us came together, people in our 20s. We had just recently graduated, moved back to Indianapolis, which is where we grew up, and we decided to build something outside of male-dominated religious institutions. U-Meed we don't work within religious institutions because we focus on family violence and addiction. Those are not conversations that we can openly have in settings like this. And a lot of the clients that we get are women. They're not going to come up to an elder male and be like, hey, I need DCS or I need whoever, I need help from somebody. So U-Meed has been able to bridge the gap surrounding a lot of these things. And we've really been able to draw attention to normalize abusive behaviors, which I'm pretty sure a lot of us can relate to, whether that's yelling at our peers, drinking to cope, and just running away from a lot of the problems that we face. So this kind of U-Meed has been filling in those gaps. It's been a very interesting journey. Beninder, I can't wait to pick your mind about navigating a space like that. But yeah, this is new for us. We're new to the space. We started because SALDEF, Kiran, really just empowered us to be visible, or at least try to be visible in a state like this.
Hey, am I good? Okay. I'm Amaris, and I'm from the Oak Creek Sangat. So really quickly, I'll just talk about, obviously, my experience that day. I was born in 2005, so that makes me 17 years old, yeah. We're coming up on 11 years now from the Sikh temple shooting, and which puts me at about 6 years old when it happened. And I remember that day, and I remember we were, going as normal. It was only me, my dad, and my brother that day, and I forgot my notebook. This is like the clearest thing that happened. I forgot my notebook, and my dad was so upset. He was like, "We're late. We have to turn back around. And now I have to go get your notebook before you're late to Punjabi class." And I was like, "Sorry, don't know what to tell you." But as we turned back around and we headed back to the temple or Gurdwara, there was caution tape everywhere. And I remember the confusion on everybody's faces, like, where are we? Like, can we go in? Can we just get to where we need to get to? Like, please, we just got to get to Punjabi class. It's not that big of a deal. And they were like, "No, that's actually the place that's closed off." And I remember all this anticipation of that day and just sitting, not knowing, what happened, what's going on. Like, what's going on in a 6-year-old's mind? Nobody... Like, you can't understand that someone doesn't like us that much, where they're willing to hurt you, because you know those people. And so that day, 7 lives were taken, including my grandfather, Satwant Singh Kaleka. And since then, I'm speaking, someone said this on the panel before, like, what we do after acts of violence, and the whole point of not staying quiet. And I'll tell you, like, the reasoning behind what we did, what we had, like, what my dad did, what the entire Sangat did, is they went out of their way to make things public, to raise awareness. And I don't know if you've seen, but my dad's done a lot of work with former white supremacists and gone out of his way to talk to these people that used to hate us. And the reason being is because it raises more awareness, which is what we've been trying to get at, on who we are, who Sikhs are. And, since then, he's kind of passed the baton on. So, us and me and a couple other youths in the Sangat, we have Sikh Youth Association, and for the 10-year anniversary, it was more focused on the youth. And I'd like to thank Kiran that day, because she really, she gave us a lot of publicity, she gave us a lot of network, she got me here, so so thank you. And yeah, that's it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jaslin. I use she, her pronouns. Also coming from Queens, New York City. If you've ever met someone from New York, they'll tell you where they're from before anything else. But, I'm really excited to be here and to be sharing this space with so many people who are in an advocacy world, but also in the academic field, and the opportunity to kind of bring those conversations in conversation with each other too. And so, for me, I really relate to what Jagpreet was mentioning, of just that working class experience of being from a Sikh Punjabi family that had to hustle quite hard. And so, I think of, I was born in 96. My father's story is coming here. I mean, he was on these, he was working in shipyards in Italy on a traveling circus, is what he says, but I question that a little. And so, he had traveled to a lot of different countries before landing in California, working in agriculture. And, he made it to New York City by word of a friend about the taxi medallion program in New York City, a means for many immigrant people in New York to have a chance to own their own business, which is essentially the medallion. You have ownership of your yellow taxi, cab, and you operate on your own hours. And that was kind of the promise of, what people would call, say, an American dream, right? And he married my mother. They came here to Jackson Heights, lived in a really, really tiny apartment, shared with 2 of my dad's friends in Jackson Heights. But that medallion was a really important sense of capital to be able to eventually put down money for rent somewhere else in a quieter, more suburban neighborhood in Whitestone in Queens. They had my brother, and then they had me, and they were able to buy their first home with the capital that was tied to that taxi medallion. And I was really lucky to still grow up in a very rich Punjabi neighborhood in the Glen Oaks, Belrose, Queens Village area, where still our community really thrives. And I came up, being surrounded by other South Asians, Asians in general, came up through the public school system, and I think class consciousness really colors a lot of my experiences of the advocacy that I do and why I do it. I think coming through the public school networks, I was in Model United Nations. We traveled only within the New York City area because our school didn't have the funding to go anywhere else. We were the kids who were in ill-fitting suits, taking the bus and the train to get to where we needed to go. And all these other kids from private high schools were getting flown out to New York City to compete at Ivy universities. And so that kind of was the first coloring. But I think the real important impact was that shift from high school to university. And got accepted to NYU. That was the dream school. Everyone wants to go to NYU. And yeah, I was doing engineering, and clearly I'm not doing that anymore. Thank God, no shade. Oh, I know this room would eat that up. And it was really interesting because 2013, 2014 was a really pivotal moment for the taxi medallion market in New York City. And so essentially when the Taxi and Limousine Commission, or the TLC, which was a New York City agency that oversaw the administration of taxi licenses, or these medallions, essentially it was years and years of economic interventions that I had no idea about growing up. And I think that's often a tradition in a lot of Punjabi households. The kids don't know about the finances. And I didn't know that my college education was being financed with extremely precarious dollars. And so the money that had been poured into to try to pay off these medallions, right? The value of that medallion was skyrocketing up to about $1 million. And that made no sense, right? So there were these immigrant, often South Asian, many Punjabi, African, Haitian, Dominican immigrants who were sold this medallion in the 80s and 90s, a promise of economic prosperity, were given this. They were taken out a loan to purchase it, paid off over a number of years. A lot of capital was put into this: homes, cars, children's education. And then, all these investments that were poured in, there was just so much that, the bubble just kept growing and growing, and the bubble burst in 2013 and 2014, and that financial market essentially collapsed. And so for thousands of families across, probably tens of thousands of families across New York City, suddenly the value of that medallion that had gone up to $1 million was now maybe like $100,000. And so you saw this immediate shift of people who started off working class, really built their way up, and we were very proud to be escalating into the middle and more wealthier classes, now coming back down again. It had no value whatsoever. And so I was in university at a time where I also was not succeeding in engineering. It was not working out for me at all. I was on probation. I was not thriving there. But I had to drop out. One, not only because of the educational performance or lack thereof, but because we just could not afford university anymore. We just could not do it. And so I dropped out of school, and it put me into having to grow up very quickly to have to provide for my family, work at the same time, but not having to go to school. And I think there was a lot of guilt and shame about, not immediately pursuing these traditional steps of what your life trajectory is supposed to be. But that, taxi medallion incident, I think, really shifted a lot of perspectives for families who suddenly could not afford the rent, could not make payments on their mortgage, could not send their kids to school, and were defaulting on home taxes as well. And so a lot of that shifted for me, and I was really lucky to be have gone to community college and CUNY, or City University of New York, public university system in New York City, where I learned a lot of really good lefty theory and politics, and that really colored my experience. But I think that those working class experiences of understanding what happens when suddenly the rug gets pulled out from under you because of circumstances that are much larger than you, of huge financial institutions making bets on working class immigrants who came to this country expecting something much more than what they were given and what they now have to deal with because of other people's financial meddlings. Billionaires, right? We're talking billionaires, the New York City mayor who just gambled with people's money. And I think for me, it really inspired me to run for office in 2021, which is kind of how me and Jagpreet got to working together really a lot. And, we spoke a lot to neighbors in the area who were also family friends and other Punjabi families about wanting to change and implement a debt forgiveness program. And that was one of the hallmarks of what I wanted to run for office on. And, I didn't win that. But I was really lucky to have worked with the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, which is a union of 20 to 30,000 members. It's 96% immigrant, I believe. It's about, I want to say 40% South Asian. You have just like the United Nations of a union, essentially, people from so many different countries in a labor union, working hard to making sure that their dollars are accounted for, making sure that their labor provisions are respected. They're, inculcated within the AFL-CIO. And it was started by Betavi Desai, who was around my age, 26 when she started. She started just canvassing taxi drivers at taxi stands, outside restaurants, outside gas stations to get a sense of what their work life was like, what it was like to have to work the graveyard shift from midnight to 6 a.m., stalking the airports, hoping for passengers to take you in a time when racial precarity was such a huge issue in the early 90s to pretty much onwards, especially in the mix of 9/11. But she started this union that just kept growing and growing, where the members shut down the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City, shut down the streets because the demands of the workers who make New York City move were more important than anything else, more important than any other financial investments the city had promised them. And so I was really lucky to have, worked together with the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, and we're coming up on a year and a half, I think, where we won a debt forgiveness program for all of these families, $350 million. And I will never forget what it felt like to go with my mom, my aunt, to pretty much write off the debt. To put in perspective just how much debt was accumulated, once we got into the TLC building to help, sign off the legal papers, $500,000 in debt were erased from my parents' records. And that is just the work. That is the work of what working class Punjabi, Haitian, Dominican, like so many different communities working together, similarly to what the structure of Drum is, to work for demands that are important for all of us collectively. So I'll leave it there. I've been talking too long, but yeah, I love the Taxi Workers Alliance.
Thank you all. As you can hear, we're really dealing with situations where there's multiplicities of identities. And that the Sikh identity can be a part of, can be an entry point for the organizing, but the locus of organizing may transform into something different. I think though that to start talking about the organizing, I'm going to pose a question to Kiran and Jagpreet, and then I would like everyone else to respond, because if you haven't noticed, this is a vocal group, and we do like to respond to each one of each other. But I'd like to start off with addressing first, because the state of community organizations. What are the challenges that you face? What are the challenges that you face, intra-community, extra-community? And how are those challenges shaping the approaches to the work that has to be done? And then which work you decide to take on, because I know in many cases, Kiran, as you mentioned before, at the end of the day, it can often just be a basic business decision.
So how much time do I have? I think there's some general challenges, and I'll try to keep my remarks broader because I think everyone has a specific experience, so I'll give more of the overview. I think there's a couple things just generally in Sikh organizing, the spaces that we're in, right? as Navdeep just mentioned, there's a lot of intersectionality. So in terms of coalitions that we're part of interfaith coalitions. Right now, we're part of, Asian American spaces. We're part of civil rights spaces. We're part of BIPOC spaces. So I think just, navigating that itself can be a challenge in really making sure our voice is heard, and that we're also thinking about and aligning and being in solidarity with struggles and advocacy work of other organizations in those spaces. I think in terms of challenges, something else, there's so many ways I could go with this conversation, so I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head. One of the things that I think it stuck out to me, I don't know if it stuck out to anyone else. I'm glad we have the panel organized in the way that we do. If you look at some of the issues that SALDEF tackled early on, they weren't the same issues that Jagpreet talked about or Jaslin talked about. So I think that really understanding the diversity of our community and the experiences and making sure that we are advocating for those that for all of our community, but particularly those that are most in need or have particular experiences where we can really amplify those needs on a national level. I don't think that has been happening, and those conversations have been happening in the way that they should. I think generally in these spaces, a lot of organizations, national organizations, unfortunately operate in a scarcity mindset. So instead of looking for areas of collaboration, it's more, can function more like fiefdoms. And I think that hurts our community overall because no one organization can do this work alone. There's so much work to be done. And I think that, when we think about the areas we want to focus in, if we think about it in terms of collaboration and working with organizations on a state and local level, and even other national organizations, you can think about what makes most sense for each organization to specialize in, where it makes sense to collaborate, where you can combine resources, or where it makes sense to do something, again, maybe not at the national level, but on the state and local level. And I think what you find is that, there is certainly duplication in certain areas. There are, I guess not the best utilization of our financial resources. I think the other thing that I've seen more recently, and we've been looking into, SALDEF was started in '96, was very much community funded. But I think there's been a sense that, these are sick issues. Why would other organizations choose to fund or support these issues? But if you look at the issues that we are advocating for, and regardless of, those particular issues, but they are in alignment with other groups, we're Americans as well. So just that in itself, there should be a space for, organizations to receive state and local funding from foundations. And I think, again, that sort of gets back to the scarcity mindset as one of the challenges. I'm trying to think of what else was part of your question that I'm missing.
I think you hit a lot of the points that we've talked about in the past. And I think we'll let things just evolve in the conversation.
Sure, yeah.
So, absolutely.
Sure.
I guess let's just give Jagpreet a second to respond, and then we can interrogate this question more.
Sure.
I think I'll start off with the intra-community. I think one of the issues that I come across, and I'm speaking from the personal lens here, not as the political director of Drum, is when I come to some Sikh spaces, including here, you could be mistaken to think that a majority of our community is not working class. It's very easy in the understanding of how we talked about the post-65 immigration of professionals, as well as looking at other areas, that it looks like maybe a large portion of our community is well off. When that has not been my experience, and the numbers in New York specifically, I can't speak for the rest of the country, but the numbers in New York specifically show a majority of our community is working class. A large part of our community is still undocumented. In Richmond Hill High School, they get 40 to 50 undocumented border crossers every month, 40 to 50, in just one high school in Richmond Hill. So getting the community to understand that this is the reality is very difficult sometimes. And especially when you take a look at the national lens, whether it's the We Are Sikh, Sikh Valleys are American Valleys, blah, 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 blah. The things that make it out there, the things that show who are Sikhs is often a very hegemonic view that is not grounded in the reality that much of our community is facing. Even here in California, right? Who are the people who work in the chicken factories? There are people. Who are the people who are picking berries, picking almonds? There are people. So that's one of the issues that we often, on the national scale, that often ends up getting perpetuated. It happens locally as well, right? The pradhans of our gurdwaras are often people who live in Staten Island, who live in Long Island. But a majority of the community is folks, sorry, if you don't know, Staten Island and Long Island are a little bit more of the bougier, a little bit more upper class areas of New York City, New York overall. Whereas a majority of the community lives in Richmond Hill and is working class and is undocumented. Outer community, I mean, I work in an organization that brings people together, right? So there's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be struggles, but struggle isn't a bad thing. Struggle is a good thing. It's with struggle that we move forward, that we come to see what common understandings are, right? Our gurus struggled. They struggled with the community. They struggled with other scholars. And that's a good thing, in my opinion. And finally, I don't want to take too much time. How do we make decisions? As I said before, we are a organization that prides itself on taking leadership from our members, from our working class members. And they're the ones who bring issues to us. But that doesn't mean that we just blindly listen and follow. No. We do a lot of political education. We sit down every month and we struggle with our members. Our folks come here for many reasons, but they also bring many prejudices with us. As Dr. Amaris Singh said before, there's a lot of anti-blackness in our community. Oh my God, there's a lot of anti-blackness in our community. And we struggle with that, and we have to struggle with that to move beyond. Oh, sorry about that. But then we also see the places that we come together. So a large part of our community is in Richmond Hill. Another community that's in Richmond Hill is the Indo-Caribbean Guyanese community. Also large numbers of undocumented populations. In New York City, the Punjabis are number 4 for largest undocumented population, behind the totality of Latinos, Chinese, Caribbean, and then mostly North Indian Punjabis. In the second half of the Obama years, deportation and ICE raids picked up in New York City, specifically in Richmond Hill. The 11419 zip code at one point had the largest number of ICE raids in the entire country, targeting both the Punjabi population and the Indo-Caribbean Guyanese population. At that point, we had to make a decision. How do we come together? How do we protect our community? So we brought people together. We created pamphlets showing people what to do in case ICE knocks on your door, what rights you have. Because a lot of times they would show up with fake warrants. The government would show up with fake warrants to entrap our people to come outside, or with a fake document. So we showed them, this is what a real warrant looks like if you're being arrested. This is the rights that you have. And we did these teach-ins in Punjabi. We did these teach-ins in English, in Caribbean patois. And the other thing we started to build was community safety networks. We took people's numbers. We told them, here, if something happens, you call this person. They live in the neighborhood. They're one of our members. And they're going to call 2 other people. And we created this tree where if ICE would come, there would be 30 people in front of the door making sure, with recording and making sure that everything was being done the right way, that our people weren't being picked up for the wrong reason. Sorry, ICE is Immigration, Customs and Enforcement, the Gestapo. I mean, the people who are tasked by the Department of Homeland Security to enforce immigration and they're the ones who come pick people up. When I say ICE raid, what I mean by that is that they'll just show up to the door where they know there's an undocumented person living to pick them up. So it's within these contexts is how we're making our decisions of what we're doing next. Right now, one of the biggest things is that a lot of our young Punjabis who are coming to Richmond Hill are finding work in the DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, which are these food delivery apps markets. They're using e-scooters and so on and so forth. A lot of them are being, especially Sardars, people with bugs, are being picked up or stopped or getting their scooters taken because they're not wearing helmets. So, this is another thing. It's come up to us. So we went to the Gurdwara. We're talking to our youth about this, about what the current context is. Maybe there's a way we can change around the laws. But we're also taking leadership from Bangladeshi drivers who've been around for a while. They've been doing the delivery work for a little longer than the young Punjabis have, and they're taking leadership from them of what are the things, how did you all come together? How did you all talk to your community about these issues? So this is kind of what our rough image into our process.
Oh, absolutely. We'll let the panel respond, but also if you have a question, you raise your hand and I'll bring over the mic.
Oh, yeah. If you want to take a question first, that's totally fine.
Y'all respond first.
Okay.
I want to continue this conversation.
Yeah, totally. No, so just coming at it from very similar themes, but one thing I also want to give voice to is, I acknowledge the positionality I have as going to Harvard, an incredibly rich university. And one of the things that we've been working on is within Boston at the major universities, Harvard, BU, MIT, we have an inter-university caste working group. And I think working within that space, and we were talking about this the other day as well, but there's also an incredible amount of casteism within our own community, both here and in India. But I think that in terms of looking at our community, it's a really important thing for us to look at as organizers, as academics, as people looking at the future of what it means to be Sikh, to be Punjabi. I think what I tend to look back to is the farmers' protests. I was working with some other youth organizers from across the country to organize a benefit where we were bringing in musicians and speakers and academics, people from all over the place, to talk about the importance of, standing in solidarity with one another. And we were doing this to raise money for an organization called Saheta that was specifically working on farmer suicides. And we came together thinking we might make $1,000, $2,000, but then with the entirety of the Sangat, we ended up making $25,000 with artists from across the nation. But what was really interesting about that is that while we were doing this, something that we were constantly thinking about, and that was a blind spot, was thinking about this idea of caste within the farmers movement. I'm thinking about caste within organizing within the U.S. And I think something that a lot of people don't necessarily know is that we talked about the farmers' protests and we talked about farmer labor solidarity. But if you look at interviewers from many low caste Sikh communities in India, they were forced to be on the front lines in Delhi. And if they didn't come, they would lose their land, property, jobs, and their safety was threatened. And so I think that, when you look at a movement like that, there's a lot of threads to look at, and there's a lot of solidarities to look at. There was some genuine solidarity as well, but I think that you see that in India, and then that also exists here in the sense that when we're doing organizing in Sikh spaces and Sikh organizations, we don't often talk about the experience of low caste folks and what that means for them, whether that be not being able to go to a specific Gurdwara and feel safe, or whether it be not being accepted in mainstream Sikh spaces. And so I think that's something that, along with other youth organizers in the college university space, we've been thinking a lot about caste and what it means to bring that together, and then kind of speaking to this idea of working with other organizations and with other communities. Something that we've recently been working on our campus is affirmative action organizing, and thinking about who is in these places and who has access to these places. And I think that's been a really interesting conversation, because thinking about the positionality of our community, of course, like we're talking about through this entire conference, there's so many struggles that all of us face and so many layers to that. But there's also a really important thing to keep in mind, in the sense that we have to be constantly standing in solidarity with other communities, because, you know, when you look at the systems of oppression and who this country was built to target and the anti-Blackness that exists within our community, I think it's really important for us to think about, as Sikhs, from a spiritual point of view, a responsibility is to stand in solidarity with folks that are being oppressed. And so I think that a lot of what we're thinking about is, when it comes to affirmative action and other issues of racial justice, where are we and how can we be in solidarity on a lot of these different frames?
Oh, it's all good. Yeah, so something that this question raises for me is just how many Sikh, whether cultural or social service organizations form organically because the social infrastructure or the social service infrastructure doesn't already exist. And I think that with like the national level, local scale that comes up about, you know, what SALDEF is like a national organization, DRUM is like a very local organization, then Taxi Workers works within New York City and state. It gets really hard because at the federal level, so many, like millions of dollars are stalled because of like bureaucratic government processes, right, that don't allow those dollars to trickle in. And I think that's what's made census outreach so hard, because I know, Jagpreet, you have a lot of feelings about this. I will just like graze over it. But like the way Sikhs were being identified or were being told how to self-identify as like broadly South Asian or just Sikh, it compromised a lot of dollars that could have gone directly to communities like Richmond Hill. And so it forces us to have to kind of spring about some organic organizations to support people. And it's that response versus preventative thing that Kiran was just talking about, right? And so, you know, for me, I think about like the entity of like the Taxi Workers Alliance and like how the Gurdwara could have intervened with certain things, but it couldn't because the infrastructure wasn't set up for that. And so it was a few of us organizers in the Democratic Socialists of America and DSA, also just like mobilizing families to have to give testimony before the city council and have to train members on how to give testimony at the city council too. And you saw a lot of sons and daughters having to translate for their parents or give testimony on their behalf because it wasn't set up. You get 2 minutes over a Zoom call, helping people get on a Zoom call in the middle of their taxi shift. Like there's so many different hurdles to have to jump over. But I think that, you know, something that comes up for me is just that like, and something that has come up, I'm so sorry, I don't remember who had said it in an earlier panel, but that like the Gurdwara could be a frontier for more services, and we need the additional community social service frontiers so that the Gurdwara isn't just the only place where you can get the services that you need.
Komal, I think you need to jump in right there.
Yeah, I was like kind of setting that up.
We'll love together.
I just first wanted to add on what everybody said. I think there's a huge lack, just on like a community level, of what allyship means. How do we show up for other people? Because I think just like ever since the mass shooting, a lot of people have said that other people have not showed up for our events, you know? But then we get caught up in a cycle of, they didn't show up for our events, so we're not going to show up for theirs. And then we're just going back and forth, and we're not able to draw parallels in the struggles that we're facing. In reality, a lot of the struggles that we're facing are the same, and we're all trying to fight for the same thing, but we're unable to kind of come together because we're constantly pointing fingers at each other. And I think talking about just like religious institutions, I think it depends on the community that you come from. I come from Indiana. We don't have many people, and the religious institutions that we have are run by very conservative males that don't want to take on social issues or, you know, really anything other than the parking lots. So it gets exhausting. It gets very, very exhausting trying to organize within these spaces. So I think like when it comes to stuff that we're tackling, like family violence, we're not able to do those things in those institutions. But then the challenge is we don't have community centers. We don't really have a space. So in places like Indiana, we're on the ground. We're trying to build something from nothing. And that's kind of where we're struggling.
Real quickly, just bouncing off of that. So obviously, I'm from the Midwest too. So we kind of deal, like me and Komal kind of deal with like the same issues, and I think there's a common theme of like our organizations are bubbled, and I feel like that might be the main problem that we have to address with organizations. We're all making our own local, small organizations that can't actually accomplish exactly what we want to at the end of the day if we're all not working together. And that also comes with a divide of like the youth and the people that are on the committees that are all elders, they're all male, yeah, they're all running the parking lots. they're all, and they don't necessarily want to give that funding, and you know, there's no organizations except like SALDEF, Sikh Coalition, like on the national base, that there's not a lot to work with here. So it's harder to make change that way, and I think that's something we need to fix. That's it.
Yeah, the real Dr. Singh, please stay.
First of all, I could go with Uncle and Auntie if you want.
Auntie.
First of all, this is pretty much the final session of this wonderful conference. And I've been amazed at every session we have had. And maybe if there is time, we can have 2 or 3 scholars do some debriefing because we have time to do that if Dr. Jasbir Singh allows that. But I am really impressed by all of you. You are beautiful people, you are articulate people, you speak with such clarity, you speak with such passion. So here, we have all been, by the way, the second set of conversation, the issues I had in mind have been coming up. How do you deal with not just the black phobia, the fear of the black body, the mistrust of the black body, a lack of interest in learning about Native Americans or Hispanics or blacks in general. How about the cost? It's been mentioned already. I mean, we kind of like to lecture others about cost, but cost within Sikhism is horrible. Right? There are the Ramdasiya Gurdwaras, there are all kinds of other Gurdwaras. There's cost 30% of the Punjabi Sikh population in Punjab. There's low cost. And here, how many years after 1699, right? That's almost 425 years, right? We still have not been able to address these issues. By the way, I want to make sure I'm not putting all of this on you. This is on all of us.
Right.
It's even on the white people in this room who work as Sikhism scholars. It's for all of us. Please don't take me that I'm saying you're doing enough, and I'm saying why are you not doing X, Y, Z also? So that's one issue that occurs to me. The other is the issue I've kind of mentioned, the Gurdwaras. I have worked for 30 years almost with the Sikh Gurdwara in Massachusetts, which has a very nice name, New England Sikh Studies Conference. It used to be in Milford, very close to Millis. Now it's in Westboro.
Yeah.
And what we did 25 to 30 years ago is to remove election. That's the source of so much contention and the display of ego. Home writ large. And then of course I don't have to mention you how many turbans have been removed, how many kirpans have been unsheathed, how many bullets have been used, how many beards have been pulled, all that has happened in every part of this North America. What can you think about it? And then final thing, I have more things to say, but I know other people have to say things too. What about the conversations among you are beautiful here. there was one reference to United States. There was not a single reference to Sikh coalition. It's easily the premier coalition, and why are they not here? How do you work with each other? How do you decide who is doing what? And why is it that there's not an overarching organization which can meet once or twice a year, despite what we were saying about the WHO Sikhs, right? And the people who have come into non-Punjabi Sikhs who have come into Sikhi in all kinds of ways. You have to work on forming some kind of a coalition of organizations where you can say, okay, what you were saying, Kiran, some things can be done together, some things cannot be done together. And that needs to be constantly talked about, maybe 6 times a year. Because room conversations are very easy now. Why is that not happening?
Thank you, Dr. Singh, for that. I pulled out 3 themes in there, and there's all 3 themes that we are going to address. The first on caste, the second on Gurdwara, and the third on the Sikh organizational infrastructure and how it operates. For the ease of simplicity, I am going to split those out as different questions. That way we can dive into each thread. I've got them here. I do want to ask the 3 individuals who flagged me down for questions, do you have questions related to any one of those topics? So that way I can bundle it in on the topic. I would say we'll start off first with this question of caste, or if you have different topics. I want to make sure we keep the conversation going. Yeah.
This is, you mentioned that sometimes the duplication of effort that arises. So how do you, why does that happen, first of all? And I'm sure there's a number of reasons, but what is, frequently what happens? And then how do you decide when to, let's say, go for efficiency? Of course, there's a lot of significance to the synergy that you might actually utilize to get more benefit to solve the problem. But then how do you decide when SALDEF is the right organization to handle it versus X, Y, Z? That was one. I had another question, but that's
okay. So I guess in the interest, since we've gotten 2 questions related to that issue of intergroup, and frankly, as we said, navigating the Sikh organizational political ethos, we'll start off there. And I guess Kiran, you might be that
personality ethos. It's mostly personality.
Personality was also brought up there. I know everyone on the panel has comments on personalities and how it plays locally to nationally. But we'll start off, Kiran, if you're okay to start off.
Sure. So I just want to make sure I'm answering the first question. Again, was about.
Yes. No, we'll go with this question about Sikh organization relations.
Okay.
And I'm going to take a separate thread on caste, so that way we can make sure we go into each topic.
More communication among organizations.
Okay, so I can certainly answer the question about working with organizations. So first of all, I did want to just correct you. I did mention United Sikhs and Sikh Coalition in terms of organizing history. So I did mention. Okay.
This one works. Yeah.
I just did want to correct that I did mention United Sikhs and Sikh Coalition in terms of organizing history. I don't think, yeah. So I mentioned that they were founded in at 9/11. Yeah. So I didn't use organizations and other examples because I just want to obviously be professional. I don't want to share conversations that are confidential or call any organization out. I think I'm gonna sort of combine my answer to the questions, and I'll answer the last part of the question and then also throw it over to Tejpal because maybe he can just confirm about why they're not here. They were, my understanding is they were invited, so that's, you choose to be where you choose to be. Maybe you have more information around that. As far as coordinating on where we put our time, efforts, and resources, to me, the starting point is you have to be in conversation. So there has to be a willingness for all parties to be in conversation and to say, these are the priorities that we think are important, and the other party has to say, okay, these are the priorities. Here's where we can spend our time, expertise, utilize our resources, and there has to be an agreement upon that. I don't think we've had sort of an overarching meeting of the minds organizationally. I think there's efforts to do that. I have, it was about a week, 2 weeks ago, I did meet with the executive director of Sikh Coalition, and we're talking about having more frequent meetings so we can be on the same page. An issue that we're both active on, and I think it's good that both groups are speaking about it in the spaces, in congressional spaces, in meetings with the White House is around some of the international issues that we're seeing, some of the ways that we're seeing Hindu nationalism play out, in Punjab, but also here in the diaspora. And I think we need to have the same talking points and messaging and understanding. And there's a lot of work and supporting research and data that should be done and shared with those congressional leaders. And around building infrastructure, I think from the national organizations, there has to be a level of humility, frankly. National organizations have been around, SALDEF for 25 years, Sikh Coalition for 20 years, United Sikhs for, I think somewhere in between there, maybe 20, 22 years. Just because we have these spaces and we are able to be in these conversations. I mean, it was 2 years ago, I was in a room of 10 people speaking directly to the President of the United States. The fact that we occupy these spaces does not mean that we know everything, does not mean that we're, frankly, unless we're in conversation and we're working with local and state groups, hearing directly from impacted community members, letting them occupy these spaces, then we're not really truly advocating for our community. So I think, again, and I'm sure I'm guilty of this as well. I'm not, sort of divorcing myself from this. I think there really needs to be some soul searching, because I think this idea, and it's tough because as a national Sikh organization, you're expected to be everywhere. We get calls for everything. Somebody's going through a divorce. I had somebody call me at midnight to tell me he had a dream about Harmandir Sahib. And then walked me through his dream. And so I was like, okay, he appreciated that I was listening. All the calls go directly to my cell phone off hours, and my husband's back there. You can. I'm sure he can vouch for how many calls I get, like on the evenings and the weekends. I even get calls from Canada asking for assistance. So, there's just no way that organizations can do it all. And maybe we can do it. We can come in and, and support for some time, and then we'll leave. But that also, that's not helping to solve long-term problems. We need people on the ground that are working day-to-day with community, and we need to be in alignment. And again, I think, I encourage all of you, if you support these organizations, and hold me to account, we should be having these conversations because it's in the best interest of our community. And I'll just leave with this last comment. When I did speak to the ED of another Sikh organization, and we were trying to determine, where it is that we should align, and where we should do, separate programming. And she was kind of going back and saying, there's nuances, there's this, there's that. I said, to me, it's not that difficult. It's, to me, when it's in the best interest of the community, regardless, that's where we need to be working together. That's where we need to be, saying the same things, having the same messaging, being aligned on policy goals, all of those things, because we are in these spaces and we have that privilege. So I'll just share that. I guess I'll throw it over to Tejpal if I incorrectly answer the other question.
Just to confirm again, because the purpose of this conference was to not only invite scholars, but also activists, because as scholars we're constantly writing about what's happening, but as activists they're at the ground level doing the work that we're writing about. So again, we sent invitations to multiple national Sikh American organizations, some state level organizations, and a lot of local organizations, including Sikh Coalition, because you mentioned them by name. But with that being said, I don't think we should be focusing on who for some reason or another decided not to come and who wasn't able to come and why they aren't here, but rather focus on, how those that are here, how we can build community and move forward together. But just to address that, it's not that we decided not to invite Sikh Coalition or anything like that. There's nothing about that. So
I feel like our local organizers here have some responses too as to how this interplay goes on with the local and national level, and the next step, and that organizational infrastructure. So go ahead. I saw a couple of y'all raise your hands.
Yeah, I think as a more local organization, we have a bit of a different relationship with the national organizations that we work with, right? I think the divergence can be a good thing as well, right? For instance, we work with the Sikh Coalition closely around the creation of an ethnic studies program in New York. They are helping take lead within that to create Asian American studies, to make sure that Sikh studies is included, and we 100% support them in that effort. But what we don't support is the proliferation of trying to get more Sikhs into the United States military, right? We fought for a long time to get military recruitment out of New York City schools, to stop sending our working class kids to go kill other people's kids abroad. So, right, we're never going to get along with that. We're never going to come to agreement, come to terms with their position around the military-industrial complex and our position where it stands. Similarly with SALDEF, we work together here, we come together here, but we don't agree necessarily with them working with the Department of Homeland Security. But that doesn't mean that when they emailed us, I said, no, you guys work with Department of Homeland Security, I'm not going to work with you. No, a common theme I'm going to continue saying is we got to struggle together. That's the only way we're going to move forward is by struggling together.
And just a very short comment is that coming from a space where and I'm sure you can speak to this as well in Oak Creek, but there are also a lot of youth organizations across the country that aren't talking to each other. And so I think my deepest hope and desire is that we as young people don't do the same things and don't continue existing in silos, because for me, coming from young Khalsa girls, I know the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, and then we also work in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, so I'm on the ground in those places, but I don't know the experience of what it's like to live in Indianapolis or the Midwest, but a lot of us have similar resources that we can share, knowledge that we can share, toolkits that we can share, things that we've learned from our organizing in DC and Maryland that maybe those lessons can be shared. And so I think that, when you look at the same thing happening amongst our generation, we just have to make sure that we're being cognizant of the solidarities that we can build, because there's so much to learn from one another, and I think that that's really important. And then just to follow up to what you're saying, I think this idea of struggling together is such a beautiful one, because something you'll hear in organizing spaces a lot is this idea of leaning into discomfort. Within an organization and between organizations, there are always going to be points of tension, there are always going to be points to disagree on, but what we have to do in order to move our communities forward is to think about where are the synergies, where can we pool our resources and continue fighting the good fight.
Exactly, because I don't
Either way. Okay. I was just going to kind of give a local organization perspective. We lean a lot on SALDEF and Sikh Coalition because they have a lot of resources out there. I think the mistake that a lot of people make when they're organizing is drawing very hard lines. You refuse to work with somebody. You can still use the resources that are out there because you don't want to do all this extra work, right? We can just bridge the gap. We can do that. And, like you guys have said, there are certain things that organizations believe in that we don't believe in, and that's totally okay. But we're still trying to represent the same community. And if we refuse to work together, we're going to be unable to work with other organizations that are focusing on similar issues, but in other communities.
Yeah, that's like a really, really great. Why am I holding this? It's not working. That's like a really great point, right? Because like I know we don't agree on the DHS situation, but I spoke with Navi from SALDEF, and we had an extremely fruitful hour-and-a-half discussion that would lead to report backs that came from a few of us, actually, a few young organizers, some that aren't in this room, and like that's organizing, right? Speaking to other folks who have different perspectives to color your understanding of why there is this disagreement. And so something very local that still like really sits uncomfortably with me was this woman in Richmond Hill who unfortunately took her own life because of domestic violence, Navdeep Kaur. 30 years old, had 2 children, and had asked for help several times, right? To have, make sure that, of course, calling the police is always such a precarious thing for so many people in our community, especially in Richmond Hill, because you don't know if that's going to open up the pipelines for ICE to get involved with your family, with your neighbors. It's not just an individual concern then, it becomes a neighborhood concern. And so, with Navdeep, it was so unfortunate that her life was taken, but it really galvanized the local community out there because this was the first time that, well, not the first time, but in recent memory, where something of a domestic violence case that is typically only a very private thing that does not get spoken about beyond the confines of your family or your home, garnered really huge viral, I would say maybe national attention around her case. But what happened was, because the local community organizations were there, right? Drum was there, Jahaji Sisters, Indo-Caribbean organizations and Punjabi groups were there together. We had a really beautiful vigil that honored her life, that shared resources that were available to community members and onlookers to understand what the resources are there for domestic violence situations, that you can get help without intervention from police, and that there are people in the neighborhood that you can rely on in case things escalate and how to de-escalate those situations. But unfortunately, the Gurdwara community could not be there because there were other events that were going on that were pre-scheduled, right? That could not be stopped. And it's a shame, right, that those events could not be halted because one of the community members who's part of the Sangat took her own life. And I think that's really a shame. And to me, it was really startling that there was another vigil where some of the Gurdwara community had held, or a speak out where media was present, where they were calling for more intervention of the NYPD, that we need to escalate this with the local police department. We need to escalate this with the Queen's District Attorney's Office. And so these are the only pathways that I think our Gurdwara have been able to access. This has been the only channel to only go through the police, to only go through legal and other criminal legal systems to get interventions for our families. And the case was dropped. So, right. Why were they? That's the question, right? Why were these communities not able to be partners with our Gurdwara, right? The only tabling I've ever seen at 118 has been for health insurance. And there's so many people who can't afford health insurance and would rather not go to the hospital for life-saving preventative care because they can't afford the out-of-pocket cost. And so there's it's the priorities, right, that we're talking about of what are we deciding to work on, and why are we holding on so firmly to the only ways that we've been able to get power, right, through the police, through government, through electing people, and resisting a different avenue to get justice for our people.
I'm going to actually hand the mic.
Wait.
Oh, sorry.
Amaris?
Just real quickly, back to Tarina's point on the youth organizations and smaller local organizations, I definitely think that, like, yeah, back to my point, the difference will be made, and to Jaslin's point, the difference will be made when kind of everyone starts coming together, when it becomes a collective thing and we stop making purposely separating ourselves from other organizations just because for this issue we don't see eye to eye, we haven't done that before. It's not that's not what the Sangat is used to doing, going out to vigils. I think that's a really big issue we have to work on, because if we don't work on that, then how are we going to spread widespread awareness to the public to let people know who Sikhs are? Mm-hmm. And that goes back to keeping ourselves together.
So, in the interest of time, and to make sure everyone gets that break that is listed in the program, I just want to make sure everyone knows that I do have that we need to talk about caste and we need to talk about the Gurdwara on the list. I'm going to touch base with the folks who raise their hands for their questions to make sure what their questions are about, but also so we can facilitate the next half of the program in an efficient manner, but also a good conversation. But if you have any issues that you want to ask about, come find me during the break. That way I can try to group things up so we can address them en masse. And however, since he's been one of our wonderful organizers, Dave Paul's going to get the mic right now to ask a question.
I want to stay quiet, but Jagpreet brought up a point that connected various of my notes. So I'm going to loop in several folks who gave talks and gave comments earlier. Jagpreet was talking about how they work with Sikh Coalition at SALDEF, but don't necessarily agree with Sikh Coalition on military recruitments, and don't necessarily agree with SALDEF on working with DHS. And directly, I feel like that connects to what Melinda was talking about earlier about the role of children of immigrant and policing. And then during that, Philip had brought up the fact about the connection between the left and those who, and folks like DHS, and the connection that they have between the left and DHS and that. And also during that, Dr. Thiron had brought up the fact that, it's amazing that Sikhs are being represented in different fields and we need to be more engaged. But with all of this, and I also want to loop in those who have done research and are more knowledgeable than me about 3HO and the connection between 3HO and the security and DHS. So ultimately, the question that I have for everyone that I mentioned, and just have this dialogue between not just the activists, but the activists and the scholars who are writing and talking about this, is where do we draw the line, or where do we find that balance between ensuring representation between these spaces and ensuring that we're not part of the continuation of policing of minority groups, including Sikhs?
All right. Who would like to start that? Kiran?
I just want to clarify.
I do just want to clarify a little bit about what we're doing with DHS, because it sounds like we're like pro DHS. basically, the Faith-Based Security Advisory Council was tasked to basically provide written feedback and commentary and critique on DHS and its programming and its components. So that's what the Advisory Council is doing. And in the report, which is getting written now, there is some significantly harsh criticism of DHS. But again, we are, engaging in the process of providing that feedback and the reporting. So there's an assumption that, in the context, it will, hopefully move some, be a process for change. And that is an assumption that, could be flawed, certainly, as we've heard from others here. So just wanted to clarify that, because it was sounding like we were like cheerleaders for DHS, which we're not.
Whatever that department was for 9/11, things have improved a lot.
With TSA, yes, we did training for TSA, yeah.
I think the treatment of Sikhs at the improved a great deal in the last few years.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. So I know baseball called out a lot of scholars in this room, and this is supposed to be a conversation between y'all too. And one of the things we love in organizing is when the community starts debating these issues. Yeah?
I was agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. I got the organizer back again. So I do want to see if any of the folks that baseball mentioned, that he name checked, want to jump in and share any observations. Okay.
We can continue for like a couple of hours.
As long as Dr. Singh will let us stay in the room. I know he needs to get his Punjab Palace. So yeah, let's continue this discussion for about 5 or so more minutes, and then we will resume after a little job break, hopefully, baseball.
Dr. 1 hour minus 5.
This is not good. Oh, that's okay, not to worry about it.
No,
still using the
recording, so you're just going to have to speak up. Sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I was looking at you and thinking of the Magnificent Seven. And all of you were absolutely wonderful. I have a couple of things to say, but one thing that I want to start with is 7 of you. Is there an organization where 720 years older than you exists like this? Why I say that is, as organization began with you folks, and the generation before did nothing. They did something, but not as much as you are doing, or maybe not on the same kind of platform. So that's just one part. Now, it's a matter of, I think, mathematics and numbers. 250 to 500,000 Sikhs in USA, I think, somewhere around that time. 335 million to take care of as a country. So even if you have a 0.1% racist element, racism exists. What you mentioned was South Asian, African American, etc. people. Does it mean that we are catering to our Sikh identity, or we are catering to the brown skin? Now, if you have the brown skin and you look after everyone, then you have a wider platform, and the Sikhs get included in that against racism that exists otherwise, and it exists. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I think organizations are great. The disadvantage is that where do they overlap and how do they work together? Because there are personality issues, there are ego issues, there's all that kind of stuff, and you need good leaders who can kind of get over those little bumps and get people together. Now, talking about 9/11, I was in here in Riverside, and the moment it happened, again, I'm not, blowing my own trumpet, but there wasn't an organization, and it was me and me alone. The moment it happened, I called the press enterprise over here and said, this is what happened. Sikhs are in danger because there's going to be a knee-jerk reflex. Somebody's going to get killed. Talk about the next morning. There was a whole article on Sikhs, the different kind of turbans, the beard. In fact, with due respect to the Muslims, they have a turban, but most of them don't have beards. So they pointed out these simple things, and the next thing was to get the Attorney General to Riverside, took the mayor to the Gurdwara. He calmed everyone down. So you have organizations, but even one person can do it because we are so diluted around the country. I think you as an organization, I think the education part of your component would be great because you plant the seed, let people develop, and let them take the responsibility of their own little communities or larger communities. So those are the kind of things. Now, I worked with the FBI for 3 years as an advisor to the Multicultural Board. FBI is a reasonably clever organization. They wanted 2 or 3 token Sardars over there with the rest of the 8 members who were Muslim, because they wanted more information from the Muslims. They weren't targeting the Sikhs to say they were terrorists, but they wanted information from the Islamic community. The wonderful thing about the Islamic community was when we had a board meeting at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock or something, they would raise their hand and say, sorry, we have to do prayer. And the assistant director of the FBI would say, of course. So sometimes being aggressive is not so bad. You tell the people in authority what you need to do, what you want to do, and make them do it. So we shouldn't play the victim.
we shouldn't be the ones who are afraid of law and order. Get in there and get in their face if we have to. They will do the right thing. The other thing I didn't hear about is how many politicians have you got in your pocket? Now that's a bad way of saying it, but you lobby, you get politicians on your side, you get the people who have money to do fundraisers, and that will make your job much, much easier. You get the police chief of the county, do a dinner for him, get him some fundraising money, get him back into his chair again, he'll be your ally. So you don't have to worry so much about how many people you can get together and educate them. You get the people who are in power on your side. And I know that we have done it here and we continue to do it, and I have had a lot of help from people who can get your visas done, who can call the offices, who can call the Department of Homeland Security. There is nothing to be afraid of, so you have to do that. Sorry, you were raising a hand or something? Oh, for him, okay. I have another minute. That means another minute. So the other thing we're dealing with is ignorance. There is a lot of ignorance. But I always say that Sikhs have been in California and the USA for over 100 years, and how much have we done? It's up to us to get in there and tell everybody who we are, because 100 years is a very long time to let 5 people know who the Sikhs are. So we have to get in there, step it up, and do whatever necessary. Then we have a lot of other things, but thank you so much. Sorry about that.
Can I can say this as someone who's been around and campaigns for a while. Our community doesn't have financial closing. We're not organized at that level, and it is a big. And Kiran can't say this because she worked as executive director of a C3 nonprofit. I'm an independent guy. That type of financial investment has not happened at a national coordinated level in a strategic manner. And that is something that these organizations, because of their tax status, cannot do.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a really powerful panel. And I want to echo that I think it's really interesting about when we think about working within these really problematic systems and structures that we're all living within. How do we do this? Can we be disruptive from the inside? Can we be subversive from the inside? Is it about supporting maybe problematic systems in a way to try to make change? And I think this is kind of what we're struggling with, and part of what your question was, and thinking about the 3HO context as well of, they've talked a lot about, I tried to interview people about, the idea about not being involved in politics and these kinds of things, and they talk about being a nonprofit religious organization, so they're allowed to, in some ways, be a part of political agendas in certain ways. But with the ICE thing and with the call security, the formation, I'm not going to speak for call security, and I definitely don't know enough. There might be more people that know more than I do. But with a call security, the foundation of it, the idea was to bring a Sikh ethos into that kind of enforcement, not being law enforcement, but into security spaces, and bringing that idea of bringing the sun supply into these spaces and trying to make it perhaps more compassionate, loving as you're being within these enforcement spaces. As their business and trying to make more money for the community, then of course they get different contracts, and some of them were ICE related, and I'm not 100% sure what all of them were. The one that I'm aware of was taking people who have been apprehended on criminal charges and transferring them from those jails to the airports to be deported though. And I'm not trying to speak for or anything about that, but just as much as I know. And now call security is no longer a thing. They have a year or two remaining of their contracts, but they're not doing security at all anymore. They're not really much of a business at all. Yeah. But I think this is such a crucial question, right? It's like thinking about how we're involved with political organizations, how we're involved with one another, how we're straddling these worlds, whether as activists, if we want to speak within problematic be able to have voices heard, whose voices are being heard. And that's why I appreciate, thank you so much for bringing us all together, because I think having those kind of academic and activist and advocacy and allowing people who are protesting from the outside, allowing people who are trying to work from the inside, can keep conversing with one another. And so I appreciate what I keep hearing from you all is solidarity, communication, the value of struggle, the value of also uplifting care and love, and like that generosity of spirit. I don't like what you're doing here, this is problematic, let's keep mentioning those things, as well as really honoring and valuing the work that we are doing. So I do want to value and honor all of that difficult work that
And then if there are any more follow-ups to Dave Paul's question, so if you're taking it, can you hold up? There's time, sure. Sure, yeah, let's take that, and then I'm going to go ahead and actually ask those three individuals who had their questions to go ahead and ask them. We'll allow the panel to think on them. I'm just trying to.
I see a hungry tea start crowd.
Okay. So you want to do your quick response?
I would like to call for a break.
Okay. Anyone who has a question, just bring it to me during this break. How long would you like to break for, baseball?
15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay, 4:30. Sorry, organizers can keep going.
So, what's up? I'm still trying to.
It's like 4 big DHS. We got the Sikh thing, we got the work.
And also just invite the community to dinner and give them. But I'm honestly, I'm glad I brought it up because it's like it's something we're working on, and like shit, that's a good example of like where it's. But it started to sound like we were like really like we were like no, the report is quite critical of so it wasn't I just wanted to clarify that for everyone.
I think the theme that I want to build around is like we build our own community. We don't have to capitulate. We don't have to get people in our pockets. Instead, what we should be doing is building our community's power.
We don't need to beg them or build our own.
And so, like, I'm gonna go into we have a seat form, so I can say whatever the fuck I want to say. But like, we recruit our own candidates. We don't go be like, hey, Mr. Congressman, support us. We're like, no, we're gonna find somebody to run against you.
Require either. I mean, it would have been one thing for me just to argue it, but the fact that those guidelines had just been changed, I was able to say if it's good enough for the TSA, it should be good enough for your jail. So that was a practical consequence of what you guys did. So
I'm
thank you.
glad. I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah.
Well, you should. Like, it might not go as far.
I had a dream about being on your side.
No, seriously, like my husband, like we've been married since September, so it's fairly new. So
Welcome to the partnership.
So he was like we, I moved out here to California in September, and so then we obviously spent a lot of time here. I actually don't have a car here, so like, but he's like, what is this? Like, why are you getting calls all the time? Especially since COVID, it transfers directly to my cell phone, so yeah. You gotta have like I don't know, like, that's not in our mission statement of what we work on.
No, what I didn't want to say, but I did want to tell you, my dissertation research is 20s and 30s, mostly Punjabi migrants who turned into immigrant teachers during the wars that tiny group of people, but some of the behind the scenes stuff, totally fascinating. Nuggets and tin, thrown in jail in Nebraska because they thought he was a fortune teller. He's writing to loved ones in Gutterite in Colorado. Basically, if you pay my family's rent in LA, if I'm in jail, and then they come up with a thing where he gets the Stockton boudoir to like do all this stuff, so he has a license to get a, your forebears.
This panel
You gotta let folks do their thing. Some people need to talk.
It's providing a valuable social service to the community.
I just saw that you work at.
Yes.
Put in a good
Well, UCSB is a safe place to apply to. Those post-career
Oh
yeah.
Actually, I did his course in Punjab in '98.
Yeah. But no, when I went to UCSB, one of the goals was, in addition to American English history, like I can do 6 sentences and I can learn Punjabi.
Yeah.
And the moment, like the first week I got there, the grad student pulled me aside and was like,
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you had that. Yeah, I mean, I didn't like my family was there. Yeah, reading all of the stuff.
so I want to ask, UCSB's fine now.
Yeah.
Sort of.
I think I don't know how much so we can adjust it.
I feel like for me,
Yeah, like that's, now that you're leading the anti-cat stuff.
yeah. Well, I can talk about the work we're doing about SB403 in California. Yeah, I can talk about that, and I can. I don't have like data to prove, but I have been wondering, like, you know, in terms of migration patterns and like, you know, some of the like footage that Chelsea was showing this morning about like, you know, illegal immigrants versus illegal immigrants, because I know there's like this. We're also doing work with asylum seekers, and like, you know, and we got pushback. We get pushback from everywhere. So we got pushback from the like, legal immigrant crowd, like, so we were like, you know, I mean, this is important work. This is like a large, you know, segment of our community, and I wonder how class and caste from like the previous ways
So we didn't get
to that effect at all.
You met with Tarina? Oh, yes.
Yes, nice to meet you. I'm Dave.
Okay, I'm Amaris.
Nice to meet you.
Did you
I went to LA from Oak Creek.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, so I recently started working at SALDEF. And I work with Kaleka, who I'm sure you met. Yeah.
Yeah, I met her in August.
Nice.
Were you there? Or?
No, so I started in
Okay.
so like after
like, I don't know what I'm gonna
all of the work that was happening there.
Yeah.
Okay. And so did you just fly in today?
No, so I live in Orange County. I live here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just drove in. This is like the first time I'm this is the first time I'm meeting Navdeep, even though we're like working together for months. But yeah, it's just been like some calls and things.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there would be some interest in like an overall reflection on what your generation and, you know, most of your women, I mean, what do you want to bring or hope to bring, or how do you hope to change?
Well, I thought it was so interesting. Some of the things that yesterday we were talking about
Some things that
or like the other one was the other one.
Sorry, Jack.
And how like the person that we're was trying to interpret like look at like yeah, and I think
Please choose an
I don't have responses. You have to say them.
I'm trying to get.
You try to start fighting. We ain't trying to fight.
Let's get it started. Let's get it started, man. Yes.
It is. Can I get a picture? I don't like the timing of it. Yeah. What's your name? It was like behind the scenes of Instagram Live. You were on sending the video. Yeah. So that the facial expressions are just so funny to watch. I feel like I'm watching like the Office Live. It's okay. Guideline, and I'll remember and we'll make sure. Yes. But then say that, you know?
What's good?
Until we apparently we're all like meat nuggets here.
We're talking about some serious shit.
I feel like it's for real.
Yeah.
Some real like chicken chassis. Like you're going to be worried about it. I'm like, oh, they're taking this. Like, me too. Me and my mom were like, I have a I saw you side eye.
Yeah.
I did? Your facial expressions. Are they? Really, they're just tired. Yeah. Three of them are just like 8 minutes. See, now when I sing it from this side, I'm like, oh, it was very obvious. So I'm singing at the table, I was like, oh, there's like no cover here. Don't be about it. You can't carry it. You've got big shoulders. I would have talked out a while ago. Yeah, I better never say that again. I can't just turn my camera off. Yeah. Okay. Pause. There was like a 15-second pause. And I was like, I'm not sure what she's trying to say. I was trying to like calculate. I make at that time, yes. And once you said it, I understood. Also, I was like, oh my God, what is happening? Why is everyone telling me that? Like, you're messing up by that. No, his whole thing was driving. I have so party to say. What if you just threw a party for like the Indiana? Oh, we did. We did.
Yeah, what is this discourse we're having? Yeah.
Pretty so handles most of it. Like something else seems to be going on. Like not just everyone's what to say. This picture of it looks like, right? Yeah, I remember that. I was like, okay, where's the point? Like that's way more. Break time's over. You said it. Then it takes people like 5 minutes to come back in here. Yeah. Right? So it's always, I mean, I don't want to drive. Well, I think like it's ourselves as castes, but then also acknowledging that people that come from a lower caste don't have as many opportunities. And that's been generation to generation. So as they're, the next generation is coming, or whatever, they don't have the same opportunities.
Yeah, I think it's also open to discussion because, like,
Right, and that's not fair. Right.
Yeah, so like I think something that we need to be involved in. I was working
Yeah. So if we're gonna go, I think it's a conversation. I think it's a priority. Right? I was talking with but it still plays a lot of people, especially in or blood air based off yeah. So that's very as much as we don't want to but within the same one.
There's dislocations too, right? Like the Ravidasi split from the Sikh community back in the 2000s, and like how it impacts the diaspora who feel sick and don't necessarily believe it. Like this was that happens versus like so it's complicated and awareness to get we get there's like somewhere between the deep and so
It's that one little part and it's small. Yeah, I think just bringing up that, like what, because I do feel like a lot of states are working on that. So bringing that up, but also like talking about it's really like seeing on caste is not a realistic approach to caste because there are generational struggles that people face, less and less opportunities as we go down. So acknowledging that and acknowledging why certain people haven't been able to get whatever because their opportunities and their opportunities. I saw them post you with a megaphone. Yeah.
Rally
Do you know that I don't know if y'all are aware that the Sikh kid is being charged with hate crime in New York. The 26, the DA charged him with for a bit. They have a lawyer, they're pushing back against it, saying it's a great argument. It's like, and I think first of all, it's a good argument, but because it takes the Hindu will be a part of the company. Let me check back up on you.
Everybody correlate to that.
Wait, what is parking lot? I don't understand what this is.
Just like they have their parking lots, the committee everywhere.
It's first it's gravel, and then like they all like rally to do like the next level of funding
To make a parking lot.
and then above that they do like the lights for the parking lot.
This is the dome. The dome one. Okay.
And then like you ask for like funding for programs. And
Yeah.
like night
parking lots. Yeah. Okay.
There's another $10,000 parking lot project.
We're in New York City. We don't have parking lots.
This is just everywhere. Like all the like suburban Gurdwanas, everybody is so adamant about the parking lot.
Yeah, like GNFA too.
Yeah, they've been fighting so hard for a gravel.
I haven't been to. I grew up going to Milford, so that's interesting. I didn't even know they had a new Gurdwara.
That's one thing I'll say though about GNFA. At least that's been like relative. At least
they've been pretty good about funding programs actually.
Yeah,
I've been impressed recently. They've had the food kitchen thing for a very long time, but they also do tabling up with like local domestic violence organizations.
And we work with them for the Afghan refugee stuff too.
Yeah, we were talking to them. Yes. Tulsi auntie. Yeah.
Oh, you call her auntie?
Yeah.
I just like don't do that.
I was like, no.
She just had her baby.
Yeah. Wait, I don't know if we're talking about the same Tulsi. Maybe we're not.
Yeah.
Now I'm trying to remember.
Her mom is.
Because the Tulsi I'm talking about is very old.
Oh, so one Tulsi, her mom then.
Yeah.
What about her daughter?
I'm going to be throwing questions out at you.
Throwing what?
Facilitate this semester.
What did you say?
I went around, I actually asked folks, like, give me questions.
Can we respond to the last one?
Yeah, there's
I
a
would
lot
love
that
to respond to that.
Dylan said that. When Dylan was like, you should invite the police chief over and give him that stuff.
We would love to respond to that.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of people that want to respond, that like actually want y'all to respond to that and respond to.
I also want to get to the cast stuff.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah. Okay. So here's what we got was Sasha's going to end us off with what do you need from the scholars, and I want to leave 10 minutes for that.
That's okay. That's a great question. Yeah, that's a good
We're going to hit what is the pushback y'all have gotten on approaching caste, class, and misogyny.
I would love to talk. Yeah, I think everybody has lots of
Don't leave
thoughts.
me started.
Yeah, we're going to talk about try to do a little on the Gurdwara, but also how do you organize around internal exploitation? That's you.
Okay.
We'll talk
That's
about
you.
And someone wants to ask about like, well, but actually, what about that inside versus outside game? And saying you need to be in the military in order to change perceptions in the system.
Whether you can actually change things from inside or not.
Yeah. So I was asked that. And then we'll ask about community. What is community power building? Because I know people have said community power building has shifted. Okay, I'm going to use that as my jump off
Segue
for that last question. Sure. Okay.
Cool.
Hello, everyone. Would you like to get back into organizing the phone? We're going to come back. Everybody, if you could get back around the table. Because remember, this is a conversation, even though I am kind of facilitating and try to, talk for y'all a little bit. But if we'll all come back, we can do the centering exercise that we love to do after people come from a break to bring themselves back into a conversation we do at every facilitation. I'd like everyone just to sit comfortably, make sure your feet are planted on the floor. Close your eyes if you want, but I'd like you to center yourselves by saying, do I feel my feet? And just bring that and say, do I feel my physical presence right now just bring it up your body. You can put your hand on your chest if you like. Some folks like to do that. And say, okay, I'm feeling that my relaxation come up through my legs, coming up into my chest, coming up to my head. And now I'm ready here to center on my purpose for this last half of this conversation, focused on how we as scholars and organizers can actually work together to advance our community. Okay? So that's my intention for the rest of this conversation, and I hope you all can set an intention as well. You can see that I've done a lot. That facilitation is where I love to be. So, I want to thank everyone for sharing a lot of great ideas and a lot of overlapping ideas during the break and their questions, and previewed them with the panel, and they are ready to continue this conversation. One of the things that was brought up, a theme that was brought up in the answers to that last question that baseball kicked us off about in terms of navigating these power structures, looking at things like working with the military and the like, which I know our panel wants to respond to, but I'm going to add another layer to that, which is, how do you view community power building? And has community power building changed for your organization? And does it change based off of which community you're working with? So if anyone on the panel would like to take that.
Anybody want to start?
Okay.
No, you can say something.
All right, so a big question, I think a lot to think about. In terms of one thing I want to mention in terms of what it means to be in spaces and places of power, I think there has been a common thread that I've seen in terms of conversations I've had with folks from organizing spaces or just the space of advocacy, and this conception that, we have to be talking to like the people that are currently in power and thinking about, we are gonna ask them for this or they're doing us a favor in this way. I think the reality of it is, as organizers, as people that are doing this moving work on the ground with our communities, our responsibility is to put pressure on them. And I think a lot of folks on this panel would probably agree. I've never seen it as my job to make the person that I'm advocating to like me. I think oftentimes they're going to dislike us, and that means we're doing something right in a way. Because I think, yes, there are conversations that need to be had, and trust that needs to be built, and collaborations that can be had with folks that are currently in positions of power. But I think at the end of the day, if you see things that are not changing, you kind of have to keep putting that pressure on. And I think that's the core reason that so many of us have been harping on this idea of solidarity. I think it's been mentioned a couple of times, but Sikhs make up 0.2% of the population. And so when we're trying to bring our issues forward, if we want people to listen, we have to build that solidarity. And then, like Komal was saying, it can't just be this one-way thing. We have to show up for our friends and our folks in all different communities to make sure that we are all together pushing this power. And so I think that it just want to make that clarification that, like, yes, we can be working with folks on the quote unquote inside, but I think that work also looks like putting considerable pressure. And so I think that's something that I deal with. And then to answer very briefly to the question of what it means to build community power, I think it means bringing people in. I think that we've had a lot of folks within our community that we've all been talking about that have been left out of conversations. People who have been so focused on surviving and trying to understand what it means to build a life in a country that often treats them with such aggression and suppression. And so I think building community power means bringing those folks in, whether that looks like political education or capacity building, but honestly making sure that the life experiences and memories and stories are not forgotten as we're doing this organizing. Because I think Kiran said this earlier, we all have to have humility and understanding that we all come with one lived experience and we cannot understand the experiences of the entirety of our community. And so I think that idea of community power building is making sure that no one gets left out.
I agree with everything you said. I kind kind of just wanted to talk about, I know the idea of working with people of power sounds like something that would be so easy, but it's not. I think a lot of the times, especially during election time, it ends up being a photo opportunity for a lot of officials. So they're coming here, they're taking pictures with everybody, with the community, but do they really know the community? Do they know anything outside of langar, outside of this concept of seva? They don't. And I think these have turned into like sparkle words. And those are the only things that people, you know, when they think of the Sikh community, they think about langar. But we're so much more than langar. We have so much more to offer. And I think earlier, I think somebody had said the older generation hasn't done much. I think the older generation, post 9/11, was mainly focused on PSAs surrounding the male Sikh identity. What is a bug, right? But we left out so many other people that are members of the Sikh community. And now, as us younger people that are graduating and starting this work, we're approaching establishing the Sikh identity in different ways. We are mental health experts. Like U-Meed, the organization that I work for, we're mental health experts. So we're approaching mental health spaces, educating people on who Sikh people are, the mental health concerns that we have, the needs of the community, and why we're struggling with these things. And that's where we get to loop in our history and all the struggles that we have faced before and how we're facing similar struggles now. That is a brilliant way to raise awareness on the Sikh identity, because you get to loop everything together and gather resources for your community. And I work within a lot of racist spaces, and that just kind of comes with the territory of being in Indiana. It's a red state. A lot of people that are in positions of power don't care what I have to say at all, but that's not going to stop me from going back over and over and repeating the same things, because I'm hoping that one person can draw parallels. Right? And I just want to say, like, I've had conversations over the years. I don't know if you guys have heard of the cases, but there's been nooses and pamphlets dropped off at different religious institutions. One of the Sikh Gurdwara, there was a noose found there. It was just one, but still, just the image of it, it's horrifying. And that was in response to us taking up space in these areas. And we approached the governor, we approached the senator and said, these are struggles that we're facing. What can you do for us? He came to the Gurdwara, he said hello, took his pictures, he left. 2 weeks later, he loosened the gun laws. He didn't make any statement on, you know, the images or anything. And it was just kind of a part of the cycle. So I just, you know, want to say that we can work with people in positions of power, but in places like Indiana, in places like the Midwest, we're not going to achieve very much by doing that, which is why we need to build our own tables. We need to build up our own spaces. That's the only way we're going to be able to accomplish something.
Yeah, and then just building off of that, I think there's an important middle ground that can be found between, you know, activists and politicians and people in the public eye. And we have worked with them. All of us have worked with them in the past. August 5th, we've got our governor to come. We invited the president. We've previously worked with the Obama administration. We have worked with like solidarity, in solidarity with these people, but the issue is we cannot always be their friend. We have to work with them, but we cannot always be their friend. And I think that's what Tarina and Komal are trying to highlight, is that we have to also get out there that we are not condemning what they're doing, because they're not helping us besides, you know, coming to the event or saying, you know, I'm sorry for what happened, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think something One thing that I think comes up is just that, like, we sometimes give elected officials way too much credit. Like, usually they're the ones who will get things over the finish line, which is important, right? It's a strategy. It's important to engage. It's important to power map who are all the power players to get whatever we need finished, right? So in the Taxi Workers Alliance case, the union was very adamant that elected officials and outside organizations would do the least amount of press and media specifically on the union debt forgiveness campaign, because this was entirely built internally out of the union. It was the members who have been shutting down the streets for like 10 years to get this campaign won. It was the members who took shifts camping outside City Hall 24/7 for 35 days. And it was about 50 members who cycled between doing 12-hour taxi driving shifts while also being on hunger strike. So these are like the things that like working class organizers will do because they know the stakes are so high that if their fellow brother is somebody who can't make rent, they will, it's like the same $20 that get passed around like a community group, right? They will do anything to help each other because the stake is in the labor. The stake is in making sure that their rights are being met. But, you know, in the press, it's like, oh my God, Mayor de Blasio agreed to get this debt forgiveness program. I mean, he signed the papers, but it was the organizers who got that ahead. And so I think that it's those levels of engagement that I think are going to be really important when we think about who are we prioritizing in our work. We have to work with the elected officials, but maybe they don't have to be given a saropa every time they come to the Gurdwara. You know, that's my thought. Yeah.
Institutional power is finicky. And my Gurdwara scholars who are here, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the U.S. government was implicit in getting some of our Gurdwarites deported and sent back to the Raj for what some of them ended up getting fancy, right? Because of the U.S. government's intervention within that. Fancy, why can't I think of it? Hanging, the noose, yes. And this pattern has continued, right? In 2012, the FBI put out a statement saying that any Khalistanis that they find, they will deport if anybody's implicit in that activity. And looking at what happened to Johal in England, we know that can be dangerous for our people too. This is just to say, institutional power is finicky. It's not, there might be times where they're going to take our side, but that's not guaranteed. The thing that I want to emphasize is building our own power. As the rest of my co-panelists have shown, there are ways we can build our own power without having to rely on the institutions that exist. And that's through coming together, that's through building our political knowledge, that's through creating new systems. As I said before, imagining what can exist, we can create it. When I talked about the anti-deportation networks that we helped create in Richmond Hill, that's power. That's us building power without relying on institutions. When I talked about how the Bangladeshi and Punjabi delivery drivers got together, that's building power without relying on institutions. These are things that, these are ways that we can continue to build power. I'll give you a great example of this. When we were talking about the unemployment bridge fund, the unemployment fund for undocumented folks, our local elected official in Richmond Hill, David Weprin, who's been representing part of the Punjabi community for 30 years or something like that, refused to sign on to the bill. And he's like, there's no reason I need to sign on to this bill. And he comes to the Gurdwara a number of times, given Saropa a number of times, calls himself the first South Asian elected. He's a white guy. He calls himself the first South Asian elected because he represents the large South Asian population. He's like a very cringy politician. But refused to sign on to this bill that would directly impact our community. And the way we got him to sign on, we went to his office, we tried lobbying him, we tried talking to him, nothing, right? Getting the community leaders to talk to him, nothing. So we just showed up in front of both of his offices with 100 members, with posters, with media, and rallied. 2 hours later, he signed on to the bill. 2 hours, that's all it took. That's building our power, right? We don't have to rely on what exists. Drum beats is a C4. Put on my drum beats hat now as a C4 so I can say whatever I want to say. The other thing that we do is if we find electeds who are not listening to the demands of our community, we replace them. We do candidate recruitment and find people who are competent, who will back our community, who understand the needs of our community. We teach them how to run for office. We help them fundraise. We help them knock on doors. We help them figure out their message. And we put them out there to run. We organize with other associations like the Working Families Party, DSA, and other sort of 501c4s and PACs. For those who don't know, C4, 501c4, when we use that term, it's like a PAC. You can, like, as a nonprofit, you're not necessarily allowed to do political work, electoral work, but if you have a C4, you can. It's weird rules in America. Anyway, this is another way that, like, we're subverting the system, right? Like, we're not relying on the people who've been in office, incumbents who've been in office for like 30, 40, 50 years, and it's done things. One of the reasons we just got free buses, one bus each in New York, is because incumbent was taken out, and somebody that we were assisting, Zoran Mamdani, came in, who was also pivotal in the taxi fight. These are ways, and then we're getting more and more, the Sikh community in New York is getting more and more recognition, because they're the elected, the powers that be, realize we're not just going to let them appease us anymore. We will come and take them out if we need to.
C4s do not have that limit. That is your traditional PAC. All the folks in the States, if you're used to seeing all the ads on TV, all the mailers and phone calls you get, those are traditions that are obfuscating who's actually behind them and all the billionaires that are running it. That is C4 power structure. That money's just not tax deductible. Chair, before you answer that, I want to add another thread that also was brought up by Congressman saying, who, as you all know, is joining the program. Because I think that this discussion of power, with a lot of folks that brought up here, is that question of the inside game versus the outside game, and how you navigate that, and whether or not, for example, it is worth it to have someone make their way up the military range, even though there's a diversity of opinion on them, make their way up their range in order to change things from the top.
So I'm not going to exactly answer that question, but I'll straddle the line. I was just going to follow up with what Jagpreet said, and I don't know if we'll agree on this, but I'll kind of pivot off of what he was saying. I think it's a delicate balance, to be on the inside. It is, we're still, I think, thinking through it, right? And then we've talked about a couple of examples, but for SALDEF being in DC, we do have this positionality, and we are in spaces where, we do get to speak for the community to those that hold power and that can potentially sway things in one direction or another. I think there is some benefit, and again, it needs to be thought through, and I think there needs to be more discussions. But an example I was just thinking of as you were talking, SALDEF was part of an interagency meeting a couple weeks ago, and one of the topics that was brought up, because I think you mentioned the FBI and them talking about Khalistani separatists, which is something that we're seeing more in media, and it's coming up in government circles. There was multiple civil rights organizations from different faith groups from the Indian diaspora that spoke to the issue of Hindu nationalism, how that's showing up in their communities, and what we're seeing overseas, but also how it's showing up in the diaspora. SALDEF is specifically doing work around Sikh censorship. So I think the fact that so many organizations were in the room and could share that perspective was helpful, because otherwise they would not get that perspective, especially something like, Hindu nationalism, where it's a lot of the people that are in those positions of power, it's something that's totally foreign to them. And when you bring up something like Khalistani or a separatist, this is something, again, that, we're still trying to get people to understand Sikhism, getting them to understand some of these intricacies, it can be tough. So I think there is some benefit. I think what we don't do enough is have that dialogue, and Jaslin mentioned it earlier about power mapping. I think that's so important. I think we're not strategic enough a lot of times, and we're not in dialogue. I think there's a lot that can be done, building community power, and then also being strategic in these spaces. So I don't think I answered your question.
I'm also keeping an eye on the clock and some of the other questions that we got in. We did get a question, if anyone wants to respond to quickly, since we're talking about, you've been talking a lot about establishment and challenges of working with establishment and making sure that you yourself are representative. How do Sikh organizations or those operating in Sikh spaces or those inspired by Sikh values make sure that they avoid the same traps of that establishment that they're challenging, and that you can avoid that gatekeeping that many have raised as a barrier to progress in our community?
I think something different that U-Meed is doing that I haven't seen a lot of other organizations do is that we've brought on board members that come from the elder generation. So it's not just younger people. We're trying to bridge the gap because I think they have needs, they don't know how to address them, and then we're able to go out into the community because we've been integrated with a whole bunch of different people. So we're able to do that. It's a challenge though, because I think we don't want to prioritize the same issues, and I think those are the challenges that we face. And I think I kind of hinted on it earlier. It's like our approaches to establishing certain things, such as the Sikh identity. It can be done in so many different ways. I think with U-Meed, everybody has their own backgrounds in psych, criminal justice, or whatever it is, and everybody has jobs in these industries, and that's kind of how we're trying to work together. But there's always going to be differences and perspectives. So I think that's the struggle that we face when we're talking about establishing. So I guess that's not really like a pro, it's more of like a con. But that's just like the reality of trying to establish a newer organization, especially that is mainly led by younger people.
So a couple of threads that I want to touch on, but to directly talk about the question you just posed about what it means to like in these spaces of Sikh values and, Sikh organizations, what does it mean to challenge the establishments we're working against and not become it? I think in that conversation, it's important to define what establishment we're talking about. But if we're thinking about like the establishments of power that exist in the US, thinking about not becoming part of the establishment, but our positionality as working within it or challenging it, I think the answer to that, while it's a complicated question, is simple, and it's something that Kiran pointed at before. It's staying closest to the people most impacted and letting that lead the way in many regards. Because I think when, we get too far from that, when we get too far from acknowledging that there are so many different lived experiences and trying to assume what's best for our community, that's when that starts happening. I think this is not an easy thing to do. While that answer might be kind of the way I framed it as, this is my answer to the question, I think it's also important to acknowledge that our community comes with a lot of multiplicity. But I think that's where we have to really focus on bringing up the people in our community that are often made to feel the most invisible. And so I think that's kind of where I fall on that. But in this question of, we've had a lot of dialogue throughout a lot of different questions about being inside the places of power versus outside. I think that there are a lot of different theories of change, and I think every organization has its own theory of change, how they go about change. I think what's important is to acknowledge that within the Sikh space, South Asian space, AAPI space, you have different organizations focused on different things, and I think in my mind that's in terms of, what powers they're going after. And I think those things can exist together, right? We can have people focus more on the Sikh education space, and then we can have people more focused on thinking about larger structures of what, capital looks like in our country, the criminal legal system looks like in our country, while simultaneously, like, having folks talk to people that have been brutalizing us and being like, this is the education of what our community is, to mitigate that brutalization, whether that be the police, TSA, etc. But then we also have our people fighting against the structures and systems that be. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that multiple theories of change exist, and those things can exist together while also finding places to energize together, if that makes any sense.
You go, girl.
I'll quickly add something. I guess somewhat also answering Dr. Amarjeet's question. Sorry, you brought it up. You told me Amarjeet's question about the gurdwaras, and this question, and answering it with Dr. Hawley's point about grounding. It's all about grounding. It's what is it that you're firming yourself in? What is it that's holding you in the principles, and in this case, our Sikh ethos, around the work that we're doing? This conversation, a lot of us, I don't know if I'm still youth anymore. This panel has really confused me about that. But this is something that a lot of us in New York City and Queens, particularly amongst the people that are under 40, have been grappling with around what do we do with our Gurdwara institutions? Like the committees are getting old. Nobody else is really lining up to take them over and to move them ahead. And this is where we're starting to figure out, like, what is the grounding that we need in order to be able to do this without replicating the same BS that's been happening over and over again. I mean, most people probably know about the fights we've had in our New York City Gurdwaras. If you search Gurdwara on YouTube, the Chimta versus Swords fight at one of our local Gurdwaras is like one of the first things that comes up. We've had shootings in the 90s over leadership and control of our Gurdwaras in Queens. It was pretty dangerous and disgusting times. And that's the reason, right? Like that no middle generation came to take them over, and that the leadership has aged so much. I think that grounding around what are we looking to do, right? Bringing it back to our ethos of what a Gurdwara is supposed to be, right? Not just, as Dejpal had wonderfully put forth, not just a place of going to, I guess somebody else also brought up, like, worship isn't the best term to use. But not just going to pray in the conventional Western sense of pray, right? Of going to struggle around politics, in creating relationships, in building community. And right, like Drum, we've been trying to do that at the Gurdwara. When we meet with our Punjabi members, it's oftentimes at the Gurdwara. When we're recruiting youth, it's at the Gurdwara. When we're having conversation, it's at the Gurdwara, right? In Richmond Hill, which was one of the worst hit by the pandemic in COVID, right? It was the #1 area that had the worst number of cases. The first vaccine center was at our Gurdwara at 118th. When we say 118th, that's the biggest Gurdwara in New York City. So these are kind of the grounding that we're taking and moving forward and trying to understand what we want to do with the Gurdwaras. Not that we have any power right now, right? It's still there. But right, soon it's going, and we're making plans, not that we're like trying to take over, but like, yeah, when we do, we want to have an idea of like, we're not just jumping into this for homie, for ego, for whatever, like, because it's an obligation, but it's because this is something we need to fight for. This is something that we need to take on. Mm-hmm. I think the only way that we don't replicate is by having a grounded understanding of what we're doing, why we're doing, and how we move forward.
We're going to get to that question in a second, but I know Jaslin wants to respond to that.
Yeah.
We're going to go into that question about past and transition to
I mean, like, of course I want to respond because I love to plot and scheme, love a good, like, strategy, right? But I wonder if, like, in this, like, conversation about the Gurdwara, like, how much we could benefit from democratic processes, right? About, like, membership-based organizations that have, like, a very direct stake in what happens and how it gets done. So I think of, like, the Democratic Socialists of America, or, like, structure around being a dues-paying member, being somebody who you're wondering, well, why the hell did we vote on this like resolution? I don't believe that's a necessary thing. It implicates you to want to be involved in a caucus, to come to annual convention, to make the votes on why things happen, vote on resolutions that can help move the mission of that organization forward. And so I think it brings about a lot of questions around what kind of democracy building or lack thereof there is in Gurdwara committees, and how often, like, we were just sitting here, Amaris was just asking me, like, oh, how many young people are on your Gurdwara committee? I'm like, I think it's just me, and I haven't been to a meeting in like months, or been called to come to a meeting for months. And that's like a very particular reason. Like, they are not organized in a way to kind of build longer term power, and there's not as much incentive for young people to get involved in the first place. There's been so many times, even at this conference, where we've heard like, oh, the young people are the future, but like, what are we supposed to do with the structures that are already there? The avenues aren't quite there yet. So it raises a lot of questions for me about how to build power and get in there, maybe not to like take it over, but like, bring those power structures together to make sure that like the future of the Gurdwara is like preserved and also advanced, so that youth have a stake in wanting to be part of it. Because when they hear those stories about infighting in the committee, why would you want to get involved in the first place?
Well, that also again raises the questions around capital.
Yeah.
Capital, access to capital to start a Gurdwara, to get accepted when you start a Gurdwara, to find, beyond the space. We've seen places like Manhattan, youth in Manhattan who started their own like Kirtan circles, and in other places and other organizations started because of that lack of access to the functional means to be able to create what would be recognized as a Gurdwara by the mainstream. I would like to now, yes.
In a few years' time, there are 4 now, and anytime anybody decides to do a Gurdwara, they make one. Now, as far as means goes, usually if you start any organization, if you don't have the money, you go to your parents, or your uncles, or your friends, you have to raise money. I've been raising money for so many causes, people don't like to see my face. So I ask them for money and they give it if they have it. So, if you guys feel that there's no connection and there are 6 elders and 1 young person, just go ahead and do something where the young people come and actually do it. That's the kind of leadership you want, where you can associate yourself, and I can tell you this the rest of the
Can I?
Can we? I think that's actually a really great stance to land into what I'm going to call the last question before we go to our close, which is about.
Can Amaris want to respond?
Just like quick sentence. I think I see the point on that, but then my question is like, wouldn't that just be furthering the gap even more, rather than trying to work with the people that have the experience and could help us, if we're like, again, trying to find that middle ground and trying to bridge the gap between the youth and the elders. And I think separating ourselves in a bigger bubble to create like a whole different Gurdwara would be like.
The bubble won't exist, and the last sentence was that the rest of the Sangat will join you. If you started something and I saw the youth and the energy, I would be the first person there and say, I will come to work with you. So don't worry about if you have something good, if you have a good party, people will come. If you don't have a good party, nobody will come. But you make a good Gurdwara and you have everyone coming to you and saying, thank you so much. So don't worry about those things.
But I think built into that comes a series of issues that have been bubbling throughout the process. Dr. Jasbir Singh brought up, and that all of y'all have mentioned. Hopefully we can address this in just a couple of minutes. Is how do you deal with the fact with the pushback that you get from within communities when you are trying to bring up issues like caste, like class, like misogyny, which I know this panel knows a lot about, unfortunately. How do you deal with the gender issues? How do you deal with the exploitation from within the community? Yes, I am throwing the grab bag on all y'all right now, but that's something that has been bubbling up throughout this conference, and a lot of our questions have been dancing. And so tell us, what has the reality been like, and how do you deal with it, and what's our road?
How much time do we have?
We got about like 2 minutes each, maybe.
Lightning round.
All right, let's go. Awesome, let's get into it. Okay, I'm gonna just say a quick word about my philosophy on this is conversation, conversation, conversation. We can talk about policy campaigns and advocacy campaigns, and we do, and we all have done that. But I think some of the most important conversations happen in our houses with our uncles and aunts, our masis, tayas, everybody. And in our Gurdwara, because I think when we think about caste, that's one of the most entrenched things that if we don't talk about, will not be addressed, given that Punjabiyat, or thinking about the music we listen to, how much caste is entrenched in the culture. But then when we look at the faith and how deeply it teaches us to be anti-caste, all of these continue to compete. And we live in those contradictions. And so I've had conversations with my family and friends, and those conversations are uncomfortable and they're hard. And I think those are where we need to start those conversations. I think similar things with race, when we think about the anti-blackness in our communities, those conversations have to happen at the very local level. We organized a conversation within our Gurdwara that aunties and uncles did come to, and we had this really good dialogue that we've been able to work off since then. So that's that. And then to lightning round the other question of, what's it like to do this work? I mean, we were talking about this at the table last night, but especially when you look at it from the gendered lens of being a Sikh woman doing this work. I'm very active on social media. I know these folks are as well. When you're doing the work that's very in the limelight, you become vulnerable to a lot of things. And so I've gotten death threats, also gendered threats of rape, saying people are, we're going to come to your school, we're going to come do these things to you because of this advocacy you're doing on behalf of the Sikh community, or on behalf of Asian American communities. Those things have become kind of commonplace, at least for me in the work that I've done. And I think that it opens up a larger conversation of as we all work together to build a better future, we are also a Sangat and a community that has to support one another in this work and the hardships that it comes with, and trying to understand what it means to think of Vanchakna as not just sharing what you have materially, but your support, your love, and that connection, because it's all of us in this room and beyond this room. We have to do the work together.
Okay. I know that I've talked a lot about male-dominated spaces, so I have a lot to say about misogyny, okay? First, I just want to kind of touch on the point of building Gurdwara. Just going to throw a fact out there. There are 7 Gurdwara in Indianapolis within a 30-mile radius. I'm pretty sure all of us can just draw the conclusion there are not that many Sikh people in Indianapolis. So why do we have 7 Gurdwara? They're separated based off of politics and based off of caste. And when we're talking about political participation, there's a reason that there is basically no Sikh political participation in Indianapolis, because everybody just keeps dividing more and more. So many Gurdwaras popping up everywhere, and we're not building a Sikh community. We're building communities within the Sikh community, and we're not accomplishing anything. And Tarina kind of hit on it with caste. I think with the elder generation and even a lot of the younger generation has a very, very hard time differentiating between Punjabi culture and Sikh culture, right? So it's if you can't differentiate those two things, you're really going to be hard on the concept of caste, right? And I know you talked about music. In the digital age that we're in as young activists, caste is everywhere. And I know there's a whole campaign going on right now, see no caste. That's so stupid. Because caste plays such a big role in the opportunities that we get, generation to generation. That's an issue. But then we see it caste is crossing over from Punjabi culture into these Sikh religious institutions, and it makes no sense to me. And then misogyny plays such a big role in what we're able to accomplish within Gurdwara. U-Meed works, we focus on family violence. So we're talking about addiction, we're talking about elder abuse, child abuse, things that are honestly normalized within the culture just because that's always, how it's been. We're not able to address things in these institutions. So layered with caste issues, layered with these egos and all these things, we're not able to accomplish really much at all. And then to address the violence, I know Tarina has hit on it, as an activist in this digital space, we're so vulnerable. We have LinkedIn, we have Twitter, we have Instagram, and we're constantly under attack. There hasn't been a day in the past 2.5 years where I haven't gotten online, and there's people from within the community that are telling me that they want to kill me, they want me to be silenced, that I'm building a terrible image for the Sikh community, but I'm not doing that. In reality, I'm just drawing attention to the issues that have been within the community for generations. And then because I work in racist spaces, I have had people pull up to where I am to events or whatever. People have held counter rallies. The KKK has held counter rallies when we held farmers' protests things. So these are kind of just things that we've had to accept as public figures in Sikh activism. It kind of just goes with what we're trying to do, which is terrible, but that's just kind of like a reality.
So I think there was a lot to that question, and I'm trying to remember all the components of it. I guess I'll start with the caste. I think what Komal said, the Sino caste, I agree, it's ridiculous. It shows up in many ways, and I think, whether it's from the split of gurdwaras, whether it's, showing up in our music or in conversations, I think it is a conversation we need to have in our community, and I think we need to do a better job of unpacking our privileges for those that are, that are in this space, and understanding, hearing from voices that feel that they have not gotten the opportunity to share their experiences or share their pain. So I would really like to see more community conversation around this, not to draw attention, to talk about caste for the sake of talking about caste, but to really make sure that this issue is addressed. Because I think part of what we're seeing is, as you're hearing from some of these younger activists, is that the next generation, I would say even the current generation, notices the hypocrisy. And that's part of what drives them away from these spaces. And so we need to start addressing it. We need to start living up to the values that we give when we give Sikh awareness presentations. We don't believe in caste. We believe in equality. We believe in gender equality. It's wonderful to say, but we want to see it, lived in our everyday experience. So that's one. The second thing, I'll just add a plug. SALDEF is supporting SB 403, as are Jakarta and Sikh Coalition here in California, which, for those of you that don't know, it's adding a caste as a protected category around discrimination. So it's an anti-caste discrimination bill here in California that's going to be voted on probably at the end of May. So look out for that correspondence from probably all of those organizations. I'll just say this around gender equality. It is tough to be in this space as a woman. I am the first woman ED in 25 years of SALDEF's existence. So, it certainly took a long time to get here. I know other organizations have had female leadership, but it is tough to be in this space. I mean, even as somebody that's, older than these guys, all of them, actually, including Jagpreet, I still have conversations where I'll meet with, uncles, and they'll say, oh, I'll introduce myself. I'll say I'm the ED of SALDEF, and they're like, oh, great, can we meet with the ED of SALDEF? And I'm like, I just said I'm the ED of SALDEF. So, that's happened multiple times. So I think it's just also getting in these spaces. The one last thing I want to add is that gotten incredible support from, other female Sikh leaders, but also from people that are in leadership spaces, from the men in our community as well. And those allies, I think it's really important to kind of change the dynamic, change that norm in terms of what leadership looks like in our community.
I think they hit it like right on the nose. But one thing I would like to add is, as I'm sure all of you know, Sikhi was rooted based off of getting rid of the caste system. And the fact that we've re-implemented that in our culture, which has made it to our religious beliefs, is just like so disappointing. And now we can't just choose to not see it. And I think Kiran's point earlier, when we need to do a lot of soul searching and really just see where we are as a community and why are we so divided within ourselves, and like what do we really what do we really go to Gurdwara for? Like, do we go there for politics? Do we go there to talk, or do we go there to worship? I don't want to say that word anymore. And then obviously there's a lot of, I was just talking to Jaslin and we were just talking about this. Are you the only woman on the committee?
Yeah.
Okay, our committee doesn't have any, right? No women. Okay. Do any of you guys have women on the committee?
All men and all 7.
Okay.
Yeah, speaking of the committees, when I was running for office, we were, obviously doing a lot of targeted outreach to Punjabi community members. We had printed campaign literature. What does that sound? Oh, got it. We were printing campaign literature in Punjabi, organizing canvassers who spoke Punjabi. Jagpreet was out there on the doors with me, right? We were speaking directly to community members about how important this election was, getting out the vote, and making sure that our community was civically engaged, and the turnout really increased. But I think the more other Desi men got into the race, the more contentious the political landscape got. And then I think being a visible Sikh Punjabi woman and the youngest person in the Desi candidate space was extremely challenging. And so I came up against Desi leadership in the Gurdwara telling me that I was doing it all wrong, that because I didn't come to them first and kiss the ring asking for support, that they can't offer me anything at this time. And so, I thought, okay, that's fine. I'm going to run a clean campaign and making sure that the constituents that I was hoping to serve actually get the services that they need. And so the office was able to help with tax support and making sure families got food stamps. But it was nearing the time of election day, and we wanted to sponsor a few langar events at 2 of the Gurdwara in the community. One went really successfully. It was really beautiful because it was interfaith. All the campaign volunteers, their families came together and were able to share this experience with me that was really important to my family. But we weren't able to host a langar at the Gurdwara that I specifically grew up going to with my family because of political disputes, because they had endorsed another candidate who was spreading misogynistic lies about who I am, what my experiences are, and what my professional credentials could be. And so not only did they ban me from having a stage to speak at, they canceled the langar. And so now I have beef with a Gurdwara because I chose to speak up for myself and stand up for myself. And I think that's incredibly important for young Sikh women to see, because we can't be trampled over. We can't let other people speak for us and tell us who we are and spread lies to thousands of people, telling them that I'm some dangerous socialist who's going to take away their rights and isn't actually Sikh, which was something another Sikh male candidate said about me, that I'm not Sikh. So how easily other people will revoke our identities because we're women is appalling, and it's disgusting. And I was really lucky to have other people in the community, other women who came to me saying like, yeah, I'm really glad you spoke out about this because it's exposing something that's been under the radar for so long. And so I'm hoping that like more of us, especially men, will step up in these spaces to say that like it's wrong. We should be uplifting people when they're coming up to leadership, and respect that they want to do something for the Sangat, like hosting a langar for us. It is in good faith. It is not to challenge and make things political, like you were saying. It's just for the Sangat.
Now I'm actually going to go to Sasha to ask a question that's going to kick off a closing session for about 6 minutes. I know we always have it, this always happens in organizing. You always leave no time at all for the fun stuff at the end. So.
Thank you
Oh,
all
sorry,
so
Dr.
much.
Summerwall, as our young scholar, to ask our future.
Thank you all so much. I feel so inspired by each and every one of you. I really am grateful for the work that you do. I know it's incredibly difficult and takes such a personal toll on you and requires a great amount of energy. So for that, I'm so grateful, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I wanted to ask you maybe to share a little bit about something that we've been talking about throughout this entire conference, which is sort of this divide between scholar and activist, and the kind of constructed category of scholar and activist. And Tarina, as someone who is kind of embodying both of these spaces, I'm wondering, how do we push against those constructed categories? And then those of us who do sort of identify as scholars, who are in kind of privileged institutional spaces, like, what are the resources that we can provide for you all to help with your work and to sustain your work? But I need to ask this in a way that feels like there is material support, like not in a sort of like aimless or sort of like intangible way, but like what are the ways that we build institutional relationships? So like I'm in this position, if I leave, how can we continue, the relationship? So how do we share and pool of our resources? And Tarina, you said this so well about like sharing synergies, and I think that that's really helpful. And then Jagpreet, you had said that institutional power is finicky. So like, what are the ways in which we can work against some of those, like, to disrupt the institutional power in itself? So.
And to help everybody with your brainstorming, as a facilitator, I'm going to drop some of the ideas up here on the board so you can take your picture and walk away and reflect on them.
This conference was great. I think there's a lot of things that I'm not an academic, but I learned so much from y'all. I think the types of stories that often, but the one thing I come getting back to is the first point that I made, the types of stories that often get told are the stories that the people in power, the people who can afford to fund these sorts of programs, want to be told, right? That class analysis isn't always there. We can talk about how we had, pioneers hundreds of years ago, and they did all these transnational journeys, but literally many of our parents also did those same journeys, right? The only difference is like they jumped the border to get here. My pops jumped the border to get here. These are, and as was said before, we need to, like, history is happening right now as well. And these stories also need to take precedent, especially those who are the most impacted within our community. The ones who need those stories told the most. So centering impacted voices is definitely one of the ways, one of the recommendations I want to throw out there. The other is like, as advocates, we need research, right? It's very difficult for us to go and advocate for a bill or for certain legislation to pass or for certain rules to be implemented if we don't have facts behind our asks. And oftentimes we'll get to like places of power and we're told like, show us the numbers, show us the research, show us the data. And within our community, there's not a lot of that, right? There's not a lot of information. Like I was saying before, like we don't really know how many undocumented Sikhs there are in the United States. We have tangential ideas. I can tell you percentage, probably what exists in New York City. I'm sure somebody from Jagara could tell you percentage, approximately how many exist in California. But we really don't have that data. We really don't know what the class breakdown of our community is. We know what the class breakdown of the Indian American community that we get lumped into is, right? And that messes us up the most. Because then when we go ask and demand that our community needs these rights, they're like, oh, well, you're a part of the Indian American community. You're the richest community, Asian community in America. Like, these are like kind of the breakdowns and the information that gets very difficult for us to we know it qualitatively, but we really don't have that quantitative information. We really don't have the research and recording that we need to make sure that we can really get our narrative from our own people, from our community out there.
No, totally. So one, I already talked to you about this, Sasha, but we reached out to you, the Harvard Sikh Students Association, when we were doing work on digital suppression recently in Punjab, and immediately you got back to us with the names of people that could help support. So I think support, one, to give the two items, comes in tangible ways, like providing spaces at universities if organizers need a place to meet, that type of resource, or providing help with a research project, but also developing programs in tandem with one another that are engaged scholarship programs that are letting community leaders lead and have, activists or organizers at the forefront and saying this is what we would need, but then having the scholarship also work as a hybrid on researching this given issue to be able to have that data. So I think there have been a lot of really cool models for engaged scholarship across the nation that I think would be really vital. And then two is that piece of that financial resource. The university has so many resources, whether it's spaces or funding. And so I think working together to figure out where those spaces and funding can come together to think about, can we work together on these projects? So we'll keep it at that.
Okay, I'm essentially repeating what they just said. And I'm a special education teacher, so I like to think that I waver somewhere in the middle, not a complete scholar. But I think a key point is policy building is data driven, like they've already talked about. A lot of the policies that we would like to work on, we need the data to support it. You guys have said it. Every time we try to push something or raise awareness on something, the first question they ask you is, where is the data? Where is the needs assessment? Who are you talking to? And that's kind of where you guys can fill in the gaps. And I think open conversations are so important to help people draw parallels. So I think a round table like this, where we can go back and forth, is just so instrumental, because then we can all get on the same page and have a concrete plan on how we want to approach raising awareness. So yeah, I pretty much just repeated what they said.
I'm probably going to repeat some of what was said as well, but I'll just add, so I definitely agree research is needed with advocacy. SALDEF has been trying to focus on research in the last couple of years, but what I'd love to do is have more of a dialogue on what, the research all of you are working. I think this conference has been enlightening in terms of getting a better understanding of the research that's currently going on. And I think, maybe having a dialogue about what's needed. What are some of the areas that we're doing advocacy work on? Oh, he's writing behind me. So there can be an understanding of what would help, push certain policies forward or certain initiatives forward. So I think really, again, having this conversation would be good, but also certainly happy to talk to you about some specifics about the research that SALDEF's doing. If there's opportunities to collaborate, we'd love to do that.
Going back to Jagpreet's point of telling the narrative, I think that's very important. Telling the story of more struggle, something more of us can relate to, rather than only telling the story about the people that we see in the masses. But also, I think that there's a very beautiful relationship that can be made between activism and scholars, and that's we tend to have experience, and the scholars tend to have knowledge, and I think we can just combine resources, and I think we can, back to policy, we can get a lot done when we have experience and when we have like things that we have learned that we want to do, but we just don't have the research to back it up.
Can I just also say one more thing because I forgot? I think also some of the work that, you know, that we've talked about here, I think would be incredible for community conversations. I know you do a lot of work around caste, and I know we talk separately about doing community conversations about some of that research. So I think just even getting it out more into the public, into the Sangat, into those spaces is really important, just to kind of echo what Jasbir said this morning.
Yeah, plus to everything, I think something that is of interest, and I wish Manpreet was here to talk about like truckers in California also. That would have been such a really good perspective. I think some perspectives on like ethnographies, it was just something someone else had mentioned, there's like a dearth of in our academic spaces. But on like contracted non-union trades work that a lot of our Punjabi folks are in, I think having clean data on that would be so fascinating to see, because like you said, it's qualitative, it's not quantitative. And just because I'm interested, and I'm not a scholar either, so I don't know if this work already exists, so apologies, but like something on modern third spaces for Sikh Punjabi people. What is the other space beyond the Gurdwara or like home and work? Like what is that third space?
Yes. Interjection about, so SALDEF, you say, is doing some research and all, and there's an implication that the universities have all these resources that you all can access. Well, a lot of universities don't have a lot of resources, so maybe SALDEF could be accessing some of the resources of the community to help support the research of scholars in these institutional spaces of the university, which we don't have in
So I think this would be a great conversation to have and like map it out. What are we doing as an organization? What are the needs here? What research is going on? I mean, 100%. I'm not saying we're going to fund every project or that funding should come from the university to us. Great if it does. I'm not going to. But again, we're seeing there's a gap here, right? And I think this is an opportunity to fill it.
Tomorrow you will, right? Go out and get money, fund yourself, don't worry too much about other stuff, but just do the work you do.
I'd like to thank all of our panelists and thank all of you for joining us. To make a special last comment.
I'll try to make it special now. I just want to, it's not a comment, I want to give you guys an affirmation shot from this movie to leave with. The level of social awareness, of self-awareness, of poise, of passion and commitment is far more than any sixth generation has been able to achieve at your age. I am like generation X. So even from the ideological perspective, to do the things you guys are going to do. I said I wasn't going to be prescriptive this anymore, but I'm going to be the prescriptive. Sikhi is about social justice all the way down to the roots. What we now call social justice. The Sikh term is Sabat Akala, the welfare of all, people. That is what Sikhi is. I'm willing to give anyone who can believe in it. That's what our history tells us. That's what our community tells us. So that is your endless fountain of inspiration and strength. I've been the only Sikh in my school. I know some of the New York guys and guys and gals, you've had a Sangat all around. It's different when you're the only in the rural area, the only Sikh. I've been there. It's really tough. The life of a Sikh is a strenuous life, challenging life, it's a difficult life. That's what makes it the most important. Sometimes we're all human, right? Sometimes we're not up to the task. But what the Sikh path is, we're human beings who are given an ideal to strive, and that's something not everyone has a gift. So that's your strength going forward. I'm not speaking on the tactical organizational stuff. I'm trying to give you that thing that I think that people are talking about. This is spiritual fountain that you can always turn to when you feel alone, when you feel challenged, when you feel that your efforts are going to vain. There are the history of Sikhs is the people who have been here before you in the most difficult situations, and they came to you guys, and you guys are already down along that path, and we're all looking forward to see what you guys are going to be able to take us from being political consumers to consume the political choices they've given to us. You guys are going to be able to offer political alternatives that come from the skills that does to the community we live in and to the country we live in. And we're looking forward to it.
Thank you for the panel. I'm going to toss it back over to baseball and Dr. Singh.
Well, thank you everybody, all the panelists from yesterday and today, all the attendees from the community, scholars and activists. I just have one very quick short announcement. I also sent an email out to all the participants beforehand. I guess everyone was busy to really respond to it. It's okay. But we had an agreement, as far as we had an agreement with Sikh formations to publish papers from this conference. And it's meant to be quick, short entries. And it's supposed to be a very quick release. We're hoping to get the entries in by the end of the summer. And again, when we say very short entries, we're looking at roughly about 2,000 to 3,000 words. For scholars, much shorter than what we're used to. Should be a piece of paper. For activists, I'm not sure if you guys are, if 2,000 is much or, but again, and it is some homework. But at the end of the day, it's building those resources that we just said that we're looking to do right now. The resources that are needed within academia, but also for the scholars. If there's anything that Dr. Uday would like to add. And I'll also send an email after the conference, maybe a week after or 2 weeks after, because we have the whole summer, but with all the details about the specific deadlines we're hoping to get the papers in by and when we hope to publish. And if you guys have any further questions, Dr. Moderator is the person to bug, not me. But again, we'll be in touch after the conference as well.
With the permission of Dr. Kishora Singh, I want to take a few minutes to offer a thank you note on behalf of the invitees, the participants, the community participants, the activist participants, the scholar participants. My name is Lou Fennec. I've just gained a few pounds because of the good meals, and just grew a beard and put on a turban, because he's very good at giving thank you notes. But I can't match that. But I'll do. But I wanted to also have a couple more minutes, 10 more minutes maybe, to say a few things that have been mentioned or not mentioned. But I want to begin by thanking Dr. Kishora Singh once again for organizing this great conference. I was here in 2019. That was a longer conference. This has been more intense, more packed into 2 days, and yesterday was pretty intense. Today has been a little better than yesterday. But every session, as many of you have been saying, full of energy, full of imagination, full of new ideas, and a lot more work to do together and separately in the months and years to come. The office staff, we saw them at dinner, and Dr. Kishora Singh thanked them individually, people who were honored, and of course, Tejpal, Adam, and Philip, and other graduate students whose names I may not remember, forgive me, but I want to thank all of you, not just a couple of people that I've mentioned. So we hope we'll continue this tradition. I mean, and also for the first thing I think I should say, for me, it just goes to show second time around that you don't have to be a Sikh Studies scholar to learn from the Sikh Studies Conference. And I've been learning a lot. I've also been making a lot of noise, and you've been suffering that nicely, politely. I'm grateful for that. So I wanted to just a few kind of quick points. One is that we've been talking about the absence of Sikh history, Sikh religion from history books. I just want to remind you of historical context again, as I've been trying to do kind of in some way throughout the conference. Black history was not in the classrooms in this country until 30 or 40 years ago. When I embarked on my dissertation, one of my committee members was novelist Ralph Ellison. No African American literature or history were being taught at NYU. Some of you have gone to NYU. I did my PhD there exactly 50 years ago. That was true elsewhere too. 1969, the struggle at San Francisco State University started ethnic studies program, and then it led to black studies and other programs, even women's studies program, and then of course the gay liberation movement and so on. I was living in the village, so I saw the beginnings of some of those things. It was an exciting time, probably showed both the challenge, the promise of progressive thought, but also the resistance to it. It was happening both at the same time, right? And that's when Punindra reminded us that some Indian immigrants started by supporting Republican. That was also true about Irish and the Italians. They started with Democrats, and then they switched to Republicans as soon as they got a measure of economic prosperity. Jews have been an exception. Asians have been an exception to a large degree. So far, whether it will hold or not, I don't know. So but just look at what is happening now. Critical race theory, CRT, has been weaponized as a political weapon. It is a political thing, even when there is no issue. No one is teaching critical race theory in the elementary school, or middle school, or high school, or even in colleges. A few prestigious institutions and law schools. That's it. But DeSantis banned 20 math books saying they have CRT in it. What is CRT? CRT is real American history. That includes African American history. And there can be no African American history without remembering race, remembering what happened to Native Americans, the genocide, and what happened to African Americans. Ralph Ellison has a famous quotation. He says, American history is played upon the body of a big Negro giant. Because wherever you go, whatever century you go, you need to deal with this issue. So moving on, one thing that has not been mentioned at all, and it's very important to mention it before we close, is what is known as Bengal Harlem. And if you haven't done it, just watch the video. Vivek Bald and Alauddin Ullah, they were in Austin, That gives you the migration history on the East Coast. Happening in the early 20s, people will jump the ships, they'll come with British ships, and most of them were Bengali Muslims, some of them were Hindus, not too many Sikhs in that group. It's a very interesting section. And I worried sometimes that Vivek Bald, I met him in person, I bought a copy of his book, which I haven't read yet. But my worry was that maybe they're saying this is the real immigration. Now, the real immigration with the challenges and the successes and the failures, Bhagat Singh thing, Dalip Singh, so on, that's mostly what happened in Bellingham in 1907. A group of South Asians, mostly Sikhs, got lynched. And one of the things to remember is, as with the Underground Railroad, white clergy have always been on the helpful side. White clergy was involved in saving the lives of those Bellingham men. I also wanted to refer to your point about democratic processes and procedures. Elections, viewed by most of us as democratic, are the most toxic part of our gurdwaras. So many gurdwaras, I mentioned that beginning with the Massachusetts Gurdwara, we switched to the indirect democracy, nomination and selection process. So at least you can't have hostile takeover. Navdeep may not remember, Richmond Hill got a hostile takeover many years ago through election. Elections are toxic democracy, if that is an oxymoron you can deal with. I also mentioned, I couldn't remember the name of the Qari at Towson State University, Maryland, professor and filmmaker, openly gay, Arjant Gill. So I just wanted to. Now, so I think this conference shows the value of putting Sikh studies in a series of concentric circles, right? The circle of South Asian studies, the circle of Asian American studies, race and ethnic studies, gender and women studies, and I think this conference has been a model demonstrating in most of its sessions. Last 2 points, very quickly. We are used to looking at United States through the immigration model. When I was showing those slides, I had all that in mind, but that was not the focus of my talk, which is that we think of America, United States, as a nation of nations, nation of immigrants. And we get a very cheery picture. So what I want to suggest, and that has been part of these conversations, but not clearly stated. Put one of the non-immigrant groups in the picture. Use citizenship as a model. Citizenship is a contract between the inhabitants and the constitution of the country, right? And both sides have to live up to the promises made, the obligations stated in that constitution. So for example, if you put Asian Americans and African Americans in the same space, you know that while immigrants, whether they come from Europe or Asia, they make progress. They are empowered. Especially people who came from Europe, they got empowered through whiteness. Whiteness by Law, Ian Henney, NYU Press. A great book on this subject which deals with both Asian Americans and African Americans. So then you don't get a very good picture. How come while Irish and Italians got their citizenship rights in a couple of generations, Chicanos, Native Americans, African Americans don't have their citizenship rights after 10 generations, 12 generations? Why? That's a question that needs to be asked. And finally, I think my imagination is MLK's beloved community. No one should feel left out. Everyone should feel cherished. Everyone should feel included. And I'm just so genuinely humbled by all of you who are working with other groups, other communities, Indo-Caribbean Guyanese, African American, whatever, Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, whatever, all of them been at one point or another cheated out of their basic rights, right? Even though Japanese Americans was treated slightly better than Chinese Americans and Desis Americans. So we keep working towards that vision. We keep working to create that community in reality. And I wish you all a very pleasant evening, and thank you for listening to me one more time.
And now we're going to shift over and load up the vans. If you brought your own car, we're going just down the street to Punjab Palace, the corner of Chicago and University, and we're going to celebrate the conclusion of this successful conference. Thank you everybody once again. Round of applause.